His abilities may be of Jor-El's blood, but it was his time in Smallville with Jonathan and Martha Kent and all the people there that made Clark Kent a hero. Now, in a Digging for Kryptonite event years in the making, we revisit the seminal, decade-long television series Smallville, starring Tom Welling, and how its reinterpretation of a legend cemented my fandom and brought the Man of Steel into a new era. The final act of a Superboy fan journey is at hand. These are the Trials of Smallville. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superboy fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. The Trials of Smallville have begun, and we're kicking things off with a special two-parter. Joining me to discuss our journeys as Smallville fans, as well as the start of Clark's journey on the show, is the host of Always Hold On to Smallville and a two-time guest on Talkville, our pal, returning guest, Zach Moore. Welcome back.
Two-time guest. Thank you. Yes. On Talkville. Thank you. Happy to be here. Happy to talk some Smallville in this Superboy sub-series you're doing, which is an interesting conversation to have by itself, I guess, right?
That's one of the things I definitely want to get at during this conversation and over these next 7 episodes is whether and how Smallville fits into the larger Superboy conversation. But first and foremost, this is a dedicated run of episodes all about the decade-long television series that aired on the WB and the CW starring Tom Welling that, as I've said for many years, wasn't my introduction to the Superman mythology, but cemented my fandom in a very powerful way. And I have been looking forward to speaking with you again about Smallville and doing all of these episodes for a really long time. I really can't express how excited I am to finally be here. And over the course of these first 2 episodes, we'll talk about Clark's evolution, physically, in terms of the manifestation of his abilities over 10 seasons, but more importantly, that emotional journey that he goes on, and especially the journey as he navigates his often contentious relationship with Jor-El. So that'll sustain this conversation. But honestly, man, before that, I always want to start with the heart of the matter, the personal side of all of this. And I know this is something you've talked about on your show, and you've talked about it when you've been on here as well. But since we're here now, can you just tell me about kind of the role that this show has played in your fandom? And I guess even more specifically, like just how was this a part of your routine back in the day? Because you and I have that shared experience. Not that we watched together. We were different parts of the country, but you and I, same age, watching the show every week. I mean, Can you just tell me about your routine and the role that Smallville played in it?
Well, I love how you said it made your Superman fandom concrete, because that's what it did for me. Now, I had grown up younger watching the George Reeves show on Nick at Night, watching the Christopher Reeve movies, VHSs of those. And so that was like, oh yeah, that's Superman. My dad had a lot of DC comics that he would pass on to me and I would read. And I mean, I knew who Superman was and all that. And then of course the animated shows started coming. But if you had asked me before Smallville, honestly, like, hey, who do you like better, Batman or Superman? I probably would have said Batman, because we had Batman the animated series. We had the Batman movies coming out when we were, of an age, right, in the 90s. And there was no, big mainstream Superman movies or anything. Obviously, there was Lois and Clark on TV. I kind of watched that, but for whatever reason, I just wasn't really watching it. I mean, I remember it kind of in the background, sort of sometimes, but I was more watching Star Trek or things like that, honestly. So, then I was totally unaware of this show coming at all, right? And I think me and my dad were watching TV. It must have been a Tuesday night in 2001. And I see a guy who looks like, that guy looks like he could be Superman. And I see a bald guy. I'm like, who's that? And then they say Smallville. I'm like, is this a Superman show? Is this a Superman show we're watching right now? And it was like right at the beginning of Metamorphosis. And we watched the rest of the episode. I was like, this is great. I'm like, what is this? And I don't know if it was a repeat or what. I don't recall, because I don't remember exactly when this was. But by the time I kind of got caught up to speed, because this is like, it's still early days of the internet, people. So it wasn't like, oh, there's not streaming the next day. You got to track all these episodes. I saw, we were a big VCR VHS family, right? So I was trained up, and you record stuff off TV and you keep it, and sometimes you keep it way too long, but you still have it. And I have a lot of my recordings of like the first 3 seasons of Smallville. I wish I had just recorded them forever on VHS, but Because when you go DVR, it's like, well, delete that, move on to the next thing, and it's just lost forever in the ether. But I started recording the show, and so I think the next episode I caught was like again, either first run or rerun of X-Ray. But the one I know for sure I saw in first run for the first time was Rogue, which was the quote unquote mid-season finale of season 1 before they did mid-season finales, right? But what a great episode that was, right? And I was like, this show was amazing. He's in high school. He's a freshman in high school. I'm a freshman in high school. He likes a girl. I like a girl. Right? It's just all of the things of like, it was a great combination of your everyday life when you're a high schooler, figuring out who you are, figuring out the world around you. And then, of course, it's Superman stuff. So I'm like, this show was like tailor-made for me. This is great. So talk about a routine. And this is before I made all the long friendships you hear me talk about on my podcast. Me and Lance Laster, we knew who each other were, but we weren't like friends yet, So we weren't like, we ended up watching like by the time season 4 came around, we were watching it together live. So that was a lot of fun. But before that, like I would, sometimes I would record them on VHS. Sometimes I watch it live, but still record it just to have. But then sometimes it's like, oh, I'm busy this week or whatever. I was in marching band, so we were very busy in the week, right? We had rehearsals and all these sorts of things. So I would sometimes, this is what I do. Sometimes I would save it to like the end of the week to like kind of look forward to, oh, I'm going to watch Smallville at the end of the week, right? And I would do that a lot. And then as more and more, as Smallville became more of a phenomenon in high school, and we started talking about it, and it's amazing how that's why I was in my podcast. I always talk about the pop culture zenith of the show. And in my experience, that was around seasons 2 and 3. Everybody was talking about it. People you would never even expect to be talking about it were talking about it. And then so you want to be up to speed. So I wouldn't wait. Oh man, did you see last night Smallville? You start talking all these sorts of things. And then it was a kind of a great tradition. And then in high school, of course, I kind of went through high school with Clark, and then he went to college, and then Clark dropped out of college about halfway through season 5, but I stayed in college, and then I became an adult and in the real world, and Smallville was still going on. And it was this great just constant throughout my youth. And as the real life parallels kind of run out after past high school, honestly, because like that's so much charm in the early seasons. Like I mentioned this when I was on Talkville, but I legit ran for band president because I was inspired. Like, you know what? Clark Kent ran for class president. I should do that. I lost, but because Clark lost, I was okay with losing. So, and that's in Drone, which is not a good episode, but it means a lot to me, So there's so many episodes of Smallville. Like there's good, there's bad, there's stuff that's mind blowing. There's stuff you want to facepalm about, but just the consistency of it being there, 22 episodes a year means a lot. And for a show to run 10 years like that, if it's just a great, like, I don't know, a comfort zone or what you want to call it. Like when you hear that somebody save me, you're like, oh, I'm in, man. And I mean, there's so much more we could talk about it, but I talk about it all the time on my podcast. I'm sure people are sick of me hearing about how I was the same age as Clark Kent on the show. But I'm telling you, man, that was a huge like in for me. The fact that this guy was the same age as me, going through the same, a change of life of, figuring out, because that's such a pivotal time in your life. And that's what the brilliance of the show was, like puberty, superpowers, growing up, like those parallels and metaphors and allegories and whatever you want to call it, right? They did a real good job with that. And that charm of the show carried on, and the show evolved into something much different than it started out as. But the strength of the integrity of the storytelling, them taking it earnestly, the performances, the writing, like it was so good. And that's why, like, here we are X amount of years later. I've been doing a podcast about her for years, and it's like this definitive pillar of my identity now is Smallville.
No, I love hearing you say that, even if I've heard some of it before, and I've said a lot of that myself as well, but it's so important. Everything you're saying rings true and so closely lines up with my experience with this as well. And it's funny because over the years, interacting with people on social media, hearing certain guests of yours on your podcast, other people have come to the show in a much different way than you and I did, right? And there are people now who have just binged the whole thing on Hulu. There was one guest of yours, I forget her name offhand, but she had binged the entire series in a shockingly short period of time.
Yes.
Right? And it's one of those things.
I remember that. And I get emails about that too. I'm like, hey, so I just watched Smallville the last couple months. I'm like, last couple months?
That's the thing. And that experience is no more or less valid than ours. But I think the reason why you and I talk about this so much is that, being the same age as the character, and also just that amount of time we spent with this show every week for a decade during a very pivotal time in our lives and our Superman fandoms, it occupies a very unique place that I'm sure there are people listening to this who feel similarly about Smallville, or if it's not Smallville, it's something else. It's one of these other things that we've mentioned. It's Lois and Clark, or it's Adventures of Superman, or now it's Superman and Lois, or the reboot, whatever it might be. But yeah, I mean, it's the sort of thing where I don't know that I'll ever experience anything quite like that. And I'm so grateful for that experience of having the show be a part of my life. I want to circle back to the ways in which it might have influenced us personally.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
Let me just say, and you and I messaged about this, so you know, but in advance of this recording here, I ended up rewatching a lot more of Smallville than I originally planned on. Like when I came up with this run of episodes here, the idea was to not create much in the way of homework for my guests or for myself, right? And in most instances, all the things that we're going to be talking about over these episodes, I was like, I could do this from memory, but I didn't necessarily want to, right? Because obviously you've been going through your rewatch over these past few years. For me, I watched every episode as it originally aired, and then I rewatched every season when the DVDs came out. But in the decade plus since, it's rare that I've actually sat down and rewatched an entire episode. I've watched a lot of clips on YouTube. I'll go back to my favorite scenes every now and then. And obviously I've rewatched episodes when I've been on your podcast, but it had been
I would hope so.
Yeah, of course. But it had been, and of course, listening to your show and listening to Talkville as well, I've, kind of experienced a lot of episodes again in that way. But as far as really sitting down and watching, it had been a long time. And I ended up watching, and I'm almost embarrassed to admit the number of episodes here, because over the past week, I've watched like 45 episodes of Smallville, wow, which even you were shocked by. And, I've got a job, I've got a family, but I made it work. I took a little bit of a podcasting break over the last week. So my nights were mostly devoted to watching these episodes. And I mean, here's the thing. Over the years, I've worried even, I don't know, but wondered if I had built the show up too much in my head, if I had mythologized it so much, if I would go back to it and say, oh, maybe I only like it because of those memories that are wrapped up in it, but looking at it with fresher eyes, it doesn't hold up. I didn't know. And I can't tell you what a beautiful experience it was over the past week, revisiting so many of those episodes. It held up beautifully. And it was this, like, I don't know, reaffirmation of everything that I loved about the show. And I'm even prouder than ever that it occupies the place that it does in my fandom. And I'm just very grateful for that. I don't know what else to say,
Yeah, no, when you revisit something you loved when you were younger and it holds up, it's a great feeling, because not everything does, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, actually, you hit on something that one of our patrons, Brian Dempsey, had asked about, which was, how did you first learn the show was greenlit or being made? Do you recall your reaction to the news? So I was reflecting on that. And I'm glad you brought that up when you were talking about your history. If memory serves, I feel like the first I heard about this was watching a preview at the movie theater. Like they ran. Okay. Yeah, I mean,
It spared no expense promoting this show then, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fairly vivid memory that I have. It was not during the official trailer portion, I don't think. I feel like it was kind of like during commercials before. Oh,
yeah, those kind of slides they show before, little advertisements. Yeah, that makes more sense.
But it wasn't like a static image. I mean, it was a trailer.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I have this memory of it, and I feel like that was the first I knew of it. Because like you're saying, the internet was different. And yeah, I mean, there were magazines and things like that, and Wizard magazine, but I don't think it had come across my radar at that point as I was, in 8th grade heading into high school. Like I don't know that I was aware of it, but I remember being in the movie theater and seeing that preview and being like, whoa, and so I watched, man, from the night it aired until 10 years later when it concluded. And when I say I watched it religiously, I mean, I was there every night, every week when it aired. And to the point where, as I look back on those 10 seasons, the memories that stand out the most are the few instances when I didn't watch it that first night because I couldn't. Now, as the years went on and we had DVR technology, I would often start at least 15 minutes in so I could fast forward through the commercials. But still, I was watching it the night that it aired. But I remember there were like 3 times when I had to delay my viewing. One was season 3, the episode Legacy.
Oh, with Christopher Reeve. Wow.
Which was a great episode.
That's one you don't want to miss right there. Yeah.
I know. And I remember my family and I, we were on vacation in Puerto Rico, and I had to set the VCR like you were saying. And like yourself, were a VCR family. I mean, I was a little kid programming my VCR, taping Power Rangers and things like that.
Right.
And not to make us sound so old, but again, it was different. You had to make sure the box was set to the right channel. And it's like, it was not a guarantee that thing was going to be there.
You want to set it maybe a couple minutes before and after, just in case, because the time might be a little off, the broadcast time. You never know.
Exactly. And it wasn't a sure thing. And you didn't have the ability to then go buy it on iTunes or stream it on the, the WB or CW app. But I remember coming back from that trip and like, I couldn't wait to get home and make sure that it had recorded, and I watched it right away. Then I remember I talked about this when I was on your show to talk about Doomsday, but that season 8 finale.
Oh, yes.
This was right around college graduation, and we were at an award ceremony, and I was able to watch it that night, but it was much later. And I remember I couldn't get out of there fast enough because I had to get home, and we all know how that turned out, but still. Mm-hmm. And then, this is embarrassing, but then season 9, it was the episode Idol with the Wonder Twins.
Okay.
Right. And I remember this was when the show was on Friday night, and I was on a date, which is great. Maybe the date just wasn't that great, because I remember thinking to myself,
after and watched the show.
I remember thinking like, I want to watch Smallville. So again, I mean, so much of my week, I feel like, maybe to say my week revolved around it is overselling it, but I was just always excited.
The highlight of the week, man.
It was the highlight, man. I was always excited. I was on Krypton's site reading descriptions and spoilers and photos.
We cannot underscore how important Krypton's site was to both of our fandoms, and we've both become friends with Craig Byrne doing our podcast. That's a real feeling that, hey, it's Craig Byrne from Krypton's site. Oh my gosh, right? And now we're friends, and he's been on the podcast many times, mine and yours. And that was such a pivotal part of my fandom. Like just reading this, I read way too many spoilers. I stopped at some point. I was like, I don't want to know anymore. And so like there were a few seasons where I just was like, yeah, give those spoilers. But seeing the pictures and the posts and knowing what guest stars were coming and the episode titles, like that was part of my Smallville routine too. Just going to Krypton site before and after every episode, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to your point, I had a similar experience where friends of mine in high school who had never read a comic in their life were into the show. And there's really something to be said for that. One of Brian's other questions was it a family event to watch Smallville at any point? And I'd say for myself, early on in that first season, my parents and I often did watch it together. I mean, by the time season 2 rolled around, I was flying solo on it. I don't know if it was they had lost interest or as I was getting older, I was just kind of like doing my own thing and watching it on my own, or a combination of the two. But at least in that first season, I remember we watched a lot of it together. And again, like just being able to have those conversations with like kids in school, like weren't otherwise into Superman, but they were into this. I mean, this show was able to tap into something that appealed to a far wider audience than you would typically think of for a quote unquote superhero show.
Well, which is what all these intellectual properties are desperate to do, right? But they are often unsuccessful, especially to the level that Smallville is. And yeah, so my parents were divorced, but I watched with my dad a lot. Like the first season or two, and then I don't, for whatever reason, kind of faded off. Or again, you're becoming more of a teenager. You're doing your own thing. I distinctly remember my mom started watching some when they had Smallville Beginnings, right? They used to air on Sundays. It was like Smallville Beginnings, and there was the rerun, right? It was like during season 3 or 2 or 3, and they show season 1 and 2 episodes just from a couple of seasons before. And I remember the first one she saw was Leech, and she was like, "Wow, this is a really good show." And that's the one with Shawn Ashmore, and he gets Clark's powers, and that's actually one of my favorite episodes. It's funny doing the podcast, over the years. I'm like, I loved this episode. If you sit down and analyze it, I don't like it as much as I did, but I still it holds a place in my heart. That's one of those episodes. And she was like, "That's a really good show." I was like, "Yeah, thanks, Mom." And then the next week, wait for it, Kinetic, which is the one with the tattoo kryptonite dude bros, and she was like, "Yeah, that one wasn't as good as the other one." I was like, "Yeah, I know." And I'm not sure how much she watched after that, but yeah, I kind of did my own thing with it, and then started watching it with friends. And my parents used to talk about like they used to get together and watch like Dallas or something in the 70s or 80s, And I feel like smaller groups of friends here, okay, but like so much when I rewatch an episode, I have memories of like watching it for the first time, like with friends. And Lance and I often, because with Lance Laster, my best friend, he's a co-host of Always On to Arrow, by the way, on our Always On to network, but also has appeared many, many times on the podcast. And we often talk about like, did we watch this together? What are our memories? Oh yeah, we watched this in so-and-so's house and everybody was watching it. It was great. Like those are fun memories to remember, just like the experience of watching the shows. But, a lot of them I watched by myself as well over the years. So it's a whole combination, but it was always this like, oh man, I can't, like you, it's like I can't wait for this. You knew it was going to be the highlight of your week when it was like, here comes Smallville, and especially in those seasons, I was really digging. Season 4, I was like, oh man, I don't know, but the first 3 for sure, I was really hyped to get to that whatever day of the week it was.
Yeah, well, let me say this. Whenever I hear you and Lance talk about watching episodes together, it's there's a part of me like, oh yeah, like that must have been so cool to kind of share the viewing experience. But at the same time, again, I would talk about it with friends at school, and then as I got older and I started working at my local comic shop, having conversations with folks there. So I think, generally speaking, I usually had at least some people to talk about it with. And so even though the viewing was usually done in solitude, or I was always done in solitude, I didn't mind that. And that's essentially how I've always watched TV until I, started watching stuff with my wife now. But like, so that aspect of it, it was never something where I was like lonely watching it, just to be clear. And, when you talk about, maybe kind of having dips at certain points, like with season 4 and one of the things that I think is clear for anyone who's listened to either of us, is that as much as we love the show, we're not precious about it. I think we recognize it for what it is, for its strengths, for its weaknesses, the ebbs and flows over 10 seasons and 22 episodes a season. Inevitably, there's going to be some of that. And so I think we recognize it. I think it's funny because when you're going episode by episode, like you do on your show, and even, anything we talk about on this podcast, when you're really discussing it and analyzing it and picking it apart, yes, we do always talk about the things that we like, but I think it's kind of just a natural instinct. The conversation often flows towards the things that we didn't like, that we didn't think made sense, that we would have done differently.
This is ridiculous.
But so again, I think we have so much love for the show, but again, are also not precious about it, and I think kind of have as objective as possible a view, of what it is.
Yeah, you got to be level-headed about it, right? I mean, it's my favorite show, but is it the best show of all time? I don't know. There's better television shows out there, right?
Yeah, but I do have to say though, and I'm thinking about how I want to word this, right? So over the course of this podcast, I mean, we've looked at so much, and there's so much that I have become a fan of, like Adventures of Superman, starring George Reeves, or things that I become a bigger fan of. My appreciation for Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, has grown a lot, right? Like I had memories of watching it as a kid, but it just didn't loom as large for me. And I've gone back to it now, and I'm like, oh, this is really charming. And I love the dynamic, the romance between them, the chemistry. So there's that. And then I also recognize anything we talk about, it's someone's favorite thing, right? And so, I always want to make sure I'm giving everything a fair shake, and I'm never dismissive or anything like that. But man, it's like I said, this kind of reaffirmation of Smallville that I've had. And this is the first time now that I've gone back and watched it after all of the reading and rereading and watching and rewatching I've done of all of this stuff over almost 200 episodes here. And it really remains my favorite interpretation of the Superman legend. And I mean, I would have been valid if I had said that before, but I feel even more so now because I think I have like a much clearer sense of the bigger picture. And yes, the personal feelings and memories are so, tied up in all of that. I get it. But even still, like it really is my favorite interpretation of the Superman legend.
Yeah. You like you said, you have a more informed opinion now, perhaps, that you've studied all these other versions and now you revisited this version that really set you on your path where you are today. Because I don't think you would be doing what you do right now with your podcast if not for Smallville, right, Anthony?
I think that's man, I think that's really fair to say. Now, kind of on this kind of personal track here. So you mentioned running for class president. I mean, what if any other ways did the show influence you, like on that kind of personal level?
Yeah. I mean, I was wearing a lot of flannel shirts in high school, just red and yellow flannel shirts, just because, but it doesn't really stick out or anything, but it's like, I wouldn't be doing that otherwise, I don't think. I mean, we live in Texas. I don't know. That's a little more like, oh yeah, that doesn't stick out as much down here. I don't know. Also, I got glasses in season 3. I didn't I have slight stigmatism, right? So I wear glasses like when I'm looking at screens and reading for long periods of time, maybe doing some photography sort of things. But most of the time I can get by without my glasses. But I was like, no, I'm gonna get glasses, and I'm gonna get glasses that look like Clark's from that episode in season 3, which isn't very good, which we'll talk about in our conversation today. But that's a big one as well. Not through nothing to do with me, just through my family. Like our first dog, my family's dog, his name was Sam, but he was pure white. He looked like Krypto. It was amazing. I have pictures of me somewhere. I don't have pictures of me in a Superman costume with him or anything, but like I have pictures of him and me, and I love that dog. Like I grew up with that dog, and he just happened to look like all white like Crypto, so I got a little thing there. And cherry on top of like I should have known I was destined to be a Superman fan. My mom was in charge of a lot of telecommunications in the 70s, and we had a phone booth in our living room, like a wooden classic phone booth. And I do have pictures of myself as a kid in that thing in a Superman costume. So like that's pre Smallville, but I should have known like those like I didn't have a chance. I was always going to be a Superman fan. But it's fun. Yeah. So those two things, but definitely the glasses, the band president, class president thing. I don't like, and then maybe some fashion choices. Like I said, the flannel, I don't like go out of my way to like, because life imitates art, imitates life kind of thing. Of course, when you're a fan of certain things, they're going to influence you in those ways. I guess the music I would listen to probably, because so much of that, it's to people who were of an age watching that show, like that was the soundtrack of your life. I said that on the podcast. I have so many people write to me and say, oh yeah, I'm right there with you. So many mixed CDs that I burned for like almost completely the Smallville soundtracks. Like my musical influences and preferences were so forged by that show, I think.
Dude, man, at that 1,000%. It did inform my musical taste as well. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the other things in rewatching episodes when you get to certain needle drops and it just like hits you like a wave and it just takes you right back. I mean, Dido's white flag at the end of Phoenix, probably my favorite Clark Lana scene of the entire series. But yeah, the music of the show for sure. Yeah. Wardrobe for me as well. I mean, I went to an all boys Catholic school with a dress code. So we were in jacket and tie every day. But by the time college rolled around, a blue t-shirt or red t-shirt and jeans all the time. I remember one time I hadn't gotten a haircut in a while. And actually one of the guys at the comic shop called me out. He's like, are you trying to grow your hair out like Tom Welling? And I said no, but I think the truth is I was. Right? Yeah. The truth is I was.
Did you get a letter jacket in high school?
No.
I did I got one for band and academics and newspapers. So I got different letters, but I got it senior year, just like Clark. Right. So,
nice.
And then again, we all have we're not going to say it all here on microphone, but you all have people who fill those Lex, Lana, Chloe roles in your life. We all, if you're watching Smallville, you I'm sure you had some people like, oh yeah, that's my so-and-so. Right. And so that was big too. I mean, this formative to you in the formative years of your life. This show was, at least for us.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the other thing too. So I went to Fordham for undergrad. Unlike most students, I didn't dorm. I commuted. I was about 20 minutes away and I'm an only child. So I had a lot of space at home. And the idea of going to share a very tiny room with someone and give up the space, I was like, I don't know if this is for me. So, I ended up commuting to college, and Fordham has a pretty substantial commuter population. So I was far from alone, but it was, different than like the typical college experience. But Clark being a commuter as well for that half a season, there's some aspect of that. We're like, oh, okay, like Clark. You mentioned having people in your life who's like Lex or Lana or Chloe. I do feel like, and this has only dawned on me very recently, I feel like the romances of the show, and we're going to do a whole episode on the ships of Smallville, so stay tuned for that, folks. But I feel like the Clark and Lana of it all, like kind of, I don't know, like gave me a skewed sense in that department. And a specific example that I can speak to. So I remember the freshman year of college, and I met this girl in one of my classes, like the first day of class, and we sat next to each other, and I was smitten right away. And I was right before the weekend. I remember all weekend I'm making plans. I'm like, I'm going to ask her out and this and that. And then the next time I saw her, I was like, oh, hey, how was your weekend? And she was like, oh, good. I went home. I saw my boyfriend. And, this is more than half my life ago, but I can still remember that feeling of that. I'm like, ugh. Now, what I would love to do is like go to my 18-year-old self and be like, hey, all right, dummy, like just move on. Like, that's it. But I think I had like Clark and Lana in my head of like, oh, if there's a girl you like and she has a boyfriend, like hang around.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Like my early dating history was totally, or lack thereof dating history was totally influenced by, well, I'll just hang around. And these obstacle boyfriends is the kind of the phrase we came up with. Obstacle boyfriend characters in people's lives. They'll go away at some point. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But you're right. This show, not that this gets kind of personal here, but I've said this on the podcast before. I may or may not have like learned how to kiss by watching this show, which may or may not have been the best example, because
depends which episodes you're talking about. Yeah,
they're eating each other's faces.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it is kids. Don't base your kissing off this show.
I know,
because it's some extreme stuff there, especially between Clark and Lana. Yeah, if you know the show, you know what episodes we're talking about. So
yeah, again, like we're saying, guys, very formative for us. It's really funny because I was posting on Twitter about rewatching episodes, and someone on Twitter, one of our audience members, was like, "Oh, you should rewatch Exposed from season 5." He goes, "That's the one where Lois does the striptease." And I was saying to myself, "Yeah, I know."
Yeah, I'm well aware. Thank you. A kind of a major thing that it's kind of didn't even occur to me because it's so second nature to me. Like I joined the school newspaper. And part of that was probably like, I knew I got a friend who was the editor and I wanted another elective. And I was like, yeah, I'll do this. And I'm sure it was like, well, Clark's on the school newspaper. So I'm on the school newspaper. And so, and I stayed in journalism. I've been in college, I was in the newspaper, and that slowly kind of morphed into what I do now, which is multimedia, which is kind of always my main thing, like multimedia. But like, that was a big component. Like, and I really enjoyed like being on a newspaper, and it made me feel like, hey, I'm a little Clark Kent over here. Right. I mean, so it's there's a lot of, ways in all kinds of categories of like surface level stuff, or like serious life decision stuff, or relationship stuff. Like, you can't help but be influenced by this, this multimedia, like Smallville. Like when you were watching it every day, you're just soaking it in, right? And sometimes I would rewatch if I record an episode. Sometimes I rewatch it, especially the good ones, right?
Yeah, and when you mentioned Smallville beginnings, in those early seasons, I mean, I would rewatch episodes on that Sunday night. So there were a lot of those very early episodes I would watch a couple of times, again, during that original, during the regular season before we even got to the DVDs. So I like to think that, we're talking about a lot of specific examples, but I think like overall, this notion of Clark, who's fundamentally a good guy, like trying to do the right thing. I like to think that that was something that imprinted on me to some degree or another. And so I think that, having that character as that kind of role model, and he makes mistakes. That's one of the things I want to talk about here that I think is a strength of the show is the mistakes that they allow Clark to make over the course of the season, because it gives him someplace to go, but still fundamentally a good guy trying to do the right thing. And again, I think it was a good example, a good model to have.
Well, that's a great point. Let me just add one more thing to that. That's essential. Like if you're going to be, I mean, let's just say it, obsessed with this show like we are, right? That's a good role model to have. You want to model his behavior. And like, if you're going to be like, oh, I want to be like a character. You want to be like a guy like Clark Kent. You want to be like a guy like Superman, right? He's going to do the right thing. He's also going to do the right thing, even when it's a sacrifice, right? So like, I mean, as silly as you guys want to say it is, right? If I'm like, I don't want to do this, but like, I know it's the right thing to do. But I want to do this instead. Like, no, you know what? It's just like Clark, man. Like he wants to do this. He wants to go on this date with Lana, but instead he's got to go save the day. And that's what you got to do in this situation. It's not an A-B comparison, people, but that's in the back of my mind for a lot of choices I made in life. Not going to lie.
I know. Absolutely. Going back to this, again, 40 plus episode binge that I went on. One of the other reasons I'm glad that I did it was I feel like in some respect, the final seasons of the show loomed larger because they were more recent. And obviously you have a lot of key steps that Clark takes before he ultimately, seizes his destiny in the finale there. And one of the things that I don't say surprised, because like I remember the early season episodes, but I was just struck by how grounded they were and how personal the stakes were, because as we get deeper into the show's mythology builds and expands, and we get more, especially when we get into those final seasons. It's the Doomsday season and the Zod season and the Dark Side season. And so much of the storylines revolve around those larger plots. And you go back to those early episodes and it's Lana quitting cheerleading, Lana trying to find her mother's graduation speech, Lionel telling Lex to fire 20% of the workforce and him trying to find a way around it. Clark wanting to play football. Clark wanting to buy a class ring, but Jonathan telling him it's too expensive. And even the freak of the week, that model, which I'm going to talk about that as well. But even there, it's not like the adversaries Clark faced in those early seasons were bent on world domination. They wanted a better grade, right? Or they wanted to win football games. It was, and I don't know, as we say that, or for people who know the show, I don't know if that seems quaint or silly, and maybe they just prefer the bigger stakes of the final seasons, right. But there was something, again, very grounded and very relatable and personal in those early seasons.
Because when you're a teenager, that is your whole world. That is your whole life. Like, yeah, like I got to make this grade. And like, it sounds absurd, but it is absurd. These are kids. I mean, they all look 30, but they're kids. So I think that's where the disconnect is. You see these 30-year-olds making these choices. Some of the actors, main and guest actors, were kind of around the right age. Tom Welling way too old, but he's Superman. He's Kryptonian. Headcanon that away. That's why he looks so old, I'm not sure. But you mentioned the class ring. I got to say, I had a class ring. Thank goodness our school colors were red. I'll tell you what, I would not have gotten a class ring if not for Smallville. I got it with a red ruby on it. It was fantastic. And I wore that thing, and that was my rare kryptonite ring. So again, Old Spice Red Zone. Talking about football. I used that deodorant for years because Clark used it in season 4. I mean, like, this is the impact of this show on us, man. So,
I know. Boulevard of Broken Dreams and Old Spice, and there you go.
What a needle hit, man. Oh my gosh. So I talk about Smallville all the time, but now we're talking about like this. So many new things are popping into my head.
No, and like I said, just like so many of these things just hit me. Just this wave of memory and emotion as I'm going back. And the other thing too, to the credit of the show, especially in those early seasons, there was a thematic cohesiveness to so many of those episodes where characters had parallel problems, issues that they were dealing with. I think it was that Hothead episode where Clark defies Jonathan, right? He wants to play football. Lana defies Aunt Nell because she wants to quit cheerleading, and Lex struggling to and ultimately defies Lionel in terms of, firing the workforce. Dichotic, when we jump ahead to season 2, the Jonathan Taylor Thomas episode, right? Like, there's this kid who wants to do everything and has the ability to split himself in two. But meanwhile, you have Martha, who's having a hard time balancing her job with Lionel and her responsibilities at home, right? And there's like episode after episode. I mean, there's so many instances of like that where they're facing these problems that thematically kind of mirror each other. And again, I feel like it helps tie everything together. And that's one of those things where, as a kid watching it,
you don't realize it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to some extent, but like watching it now, I really have this sense of like, oh wow, like they were constructing these very thoughtfully.
Yeah, like this is about something. This episode is about this or about that. It's not just like, oh, it's cool that he did this thing and fought this guy. Yeah, that is cool. But when you can meld the two together, like, because like on the podcast, because I'm like going scene by scene, I'm like, oh, by the way, Lex Luthor is in this episode, because there's some episodes where they don't do that.
Yes,
and it's been like 15 minutes. I'm like, oh, it's the Lex B plot. And the Lex B plot often lifts a sinking episode, like Craving, or, again, I have a personal connection to it, but Drone, he has good B plots in these episodes, and they really raise them up. And they could go in any episode. They have nothing to do with the A plot. There's no crossover whatsoever. But with the episodes that do, they all intersect and converge. You're like, you had some themes here. And then the characters, like, even again, Hothead, the football one with the pyrotechnic football coach. But to see Clark, Lana, and Lex, your 3 main characters, by the way, let's not forget, they were the big 3. Look at all the posters and all the promotions and the opening credits, sitting there talking about their problems relating to each other, then making decisions based off that. There's a lot of heart in these early episodes. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. I mean, Rosetta, key formative episode for the show, for Clark's journey. But, they're all working on a family tree, right? So this idea of, trying to piece together where you come from, right, really brings Clark's inner struggle to the forefront. An episode like Crush with Adam Brody, that was one of the ones I rewatched.
Love that one. Yeah.
Was that pivotal for Clark's journey? Not necessarily, but I love the OC, and I was like, I gotta watch this again and support Adam Brody. And I watched that one, and it's called Crush, right? And he uses his telekinesis to crush the doctor who he feels failed him, and to crush poor Principal Kwan, who he blames for his accident. But also it's Chloe with this unrequited crush on Clark, who of course has had this crush on Lana. Like,
the double meaning episode titles are so great, right?
Yeah. I mean, I just came away with an even greater appreciation and a better understanding too, of like, I think why it grabbed me so much and why it spoke to, again, classmates who never watched this stuff, or my parents, or, just people who weren't following the comics per se. Cause I think it really was able to tap into the humanity and the personal struggles and dynamics of these characters. In a very engaging way. And of course, it's all set against the backdrop of this larger mythology and legend. But again, I think a lot of the themes are universal. This idea of feeling different, feeling out of place, wanting to be normal, not knowing where you come from, which may or may not obviously apply to everybody, but certainly where you're going. And when we get to this point, and obviously this will be a big part of our conversation, where there's a sense that maybe he comes from this race of conquerors, and him being sent here wasn't a benign thing, but rather he has this larger, darker quest ahead of him. Wrestling with all of that. And look, like I said, we're going to do a whole episode on the romances, but that's, I think, another key aspect of why this grabs so many people. And let us not forget, like, this was a WB drama.
Yeah. And it was this perfect meld of that too, right? It was like, okay, you got your teen coming of age story, like in Everwood, for example. I know you're a big Everwood fan. I love that flavor a lot. Dawson's Creek with superpowers is how the show was described. It was a very apt description, right? Because it's, teenagers. I mean, you're like, wait, it's just about your relationships. Look, we've all been teenagers. We know how much time and effort that stuff occupies your space in your life, in your head, and your actions when you're in high school. So that it tracks for people of this age, right? And then you get your superhero action adventure stuff. Get your quota in there. You get a little bit of this, a little bit of superpowers here and there. Also, you talk about the grounded nature, just the very quaint, cute uses of Clark's powers. Like, oh, he's going to put this nail in a post. He's going to make his toast with his heat vision. Like, I love how they always sprinkle that stuff in. And they do that throughout the show. But, like, it was so fresh then. A fresh new episode, by the way, as they promoted them back in the day. Fresh new episode. It was fresh back then. It was just because technology had really caught up to showing these powers, where it's not like, oh, we can't afford to do this. It's way too expensive. Yeah. We can afford to see him heat vision some toast. Okay, let's do that. It's fun. Of course, it would do that. So even on that level, they were showing us stuff that we hadn't really seen on the regular basis, as with Superman, for example. Because Lois and Clark was a few years before, Superboy was a few years before that. But I just feel like this one just really tapped in the whole, like, that Americana. I mean, it's post 9/11. That was a big thing, right? A big component of the show, right?
Yeah, I know. This premiered in October of 2001. No, I mean, I remember that. And obviously they've talked about that on Talkville about filming. Right. Hothead, right? Was what they were filming that during when 9/11 happened. So, that and 24. The 24 television series debuted at the same time as well. And that was another one that was like
very patriotic in its own way, sort of.
Yeah. I mean, that's another one that, like, for me, like, that was huge in high school, like, especially with friends like that. Like, everyone was watching 24. Like, that was the thing. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's funny too, because now since Smallville, we've got all these shows with full-fledged superheroics and costumes and teams and all this stuff. And I go back to this, and I think, if I'm being honest with myself, I think throughout the run of Smallville, unless I'm really, like, misremembering frustrations that I had, I think overall I always understood and appreciated their mandate, this whole idea that this is the story before. Like, I don't have any memory of being like, oh, you should be in the costume already. Like, I know that was a frustration among certain folks. And look, you get to 10 seasons and there are moments where it does feel like Clark is being held back. And again, we'll talk about that. But overall, like, I always appreciated this was the time before, and we're following this character on this journey here. And I'd be curious, especially for people who have discovered this show since the Arrowverse, right? Like, they watch the Arrowverse shows and now, like, they found Smallville. If they watch it and feel like, oh, hey, why where's the costumes? Or I wouldn't be surprised if it's the opposite. If this feels refreshing. Yeah. Because you've had so much of the rest of it. And again, here is a character who has somewhere to go. So I wonder about that.
In a world of all these superhero projects where it's like, what if we tell a story like before or after he's the hero, right? This is the one that works because Kal-El is an alien and he's got power. So it doesn't matter what stage of his life he's at. You can tell stories with him in this area. And a lot of shows, don't necessarily do that. And I will say, to speak to the Arrowverse, and an incredible accomplishment the Arrowverse is, right? But it stands on the shoulders of Smallville because, Green Arrow on Smallville, Arrow show, like, you can trace all back here. So many of the behind the scenes talent, they filmed it up there, the same locations, all that stuff. I think the Arrowverse, it got kind of formulaic at some point. I mean, I think we'd all agree. And like, what are you like working towards? Right. I mean, Smallville, like, you kind of knew what the end game was. It was fun to kind of see, oh, how are we going to get where we're going? And then also, it cannot be understated, like, the Clark and Lex dynamic of this show and the Kents and Luthers by extension, right? It was about, about family, right? So much of the show made this show, like if you take Lex away, I mean, it worked out in, seasons 9 and 10, and 8. But if you take Lex out of this from day one, like what are you doing? Like so much of the intrigue of this show is that these guys who are going to become enemies in the future be friends, and you believe that they're friends, and they were friends, right? And that was so interesting. And like, oh well, not only is it the rise of Clark, it's the fall of Lex, and you have those two parallel journeys going on that you're riveted to see how it's going to turn out and how they're going to turn against each other and go their separate ways, and that was a huge component of this show that doesn't exist in so many of the other shows, for example.
Totally. And on that note, one of the other things that I wanted to kind of give Smallville its flowers for, like, I don't know if it gets enough credit. Maybe it does, but I don't know if it gets enough credit for its originality, because yes, there are aspects that have some basis in the comics or other media, but so it's not that Smallville is necessarily inventing it whole cloth, but it's like the spin that they're able to put on it, the depth that they're able to bring is so far beyond kind of the germ of the idea that might be there, that again, I think a lot of credit is owed to the show for its originality. I mean, the notion of the ship arriving in this meteor shower, right, which now provides you with your engine, your vehicle for storytelling every week. The idea that it's not just that Clark arrives, but this meteor shower that he arrives in fundamentally alters this town and infects its inhabitants. And then we get this so-called Freak of the Week model, which, you and I were getting at this before, and it's one of those things that I know people might be quick to kind of sneer at when it comes to the show. But again, it provided that opportunity to tap into those themes that we were talking about before, right? To amplify the inner struggles and the interpersonal dynamics that the characters are dealing with. Like, that's what it's there for.
Well, of all people, Tom Welling has explained this very well on Talkville, because Michael Rosenbaum's like, what is these teenagers going crazy, doing all this stuff all the time? And Tom Welling's like, no, Michael, you don't understand. Like, these are extensions that show the characters and the motivations of their a vehicle. I'm like, Tom Welling, he gets it.
Yeah.
It was a very amazing explanation. He distilled it down to why this is happening. And yes, some of them are dumb, right? Like, some of them are dumb. They're stupid. Like, but a lot of them work really well. So it's such a clever conceit. Like, you can't have Superman villains here every day of the week, right? I mean, if you look at the first 3 seasons, there are 0 Superman villains. There's some Superman supporting characters and kind of around there and stuff, but there were no Brainiacs, no Zods, nothing like that. But you have to have Superman do stuff. Like, he has to have physical villains to fight, and mental villains too, and that's fun. Obviously, that has its role. But like, it's a romance show, or it's a coming of age show, but it's also a little bit of an action adventure show. And you got to have that action adventure. And how do you get it? You get other, super powered people, and having Kryptonite be the vehicle for it. I mean, look at the Flash. They copied it. They're like, oh, it's the particle accelerator explosion. Oh, look, 3 seasons later, like, oh yeah, this guy got caught up in the particle accelerator. It's the same thing that Smallville did back in the day. Now, I would have stopped the 1 meter shower myself, but that being said, it was a genius move, as you said, to kind of hide his ship crashing, provide weaknesses for him around town so he can't just be this unstoppable force everywhere, and also, fuel these, antagonist characters.
We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. This podcast is made possible by the support of our Patreon community. Sign up for a monthly or annual membership at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato and choose from a range of rewards. This week, I want to spotlight our DC Tourist tier, which includes exclusive access to the monthly spin-off podcast Beyond Metropolis, where we apply the signature digging for kryptonite approach to the rest of the DC universe. Sign up today, and thank you to all patrons. Absolutely. And then with the Lex and Lana of it all, with Lex in particular, yes, when we get to Lex's Silver Age origin story in Adventure Comics, yes, he lives in Smallville and he's friends with Superboy for like 3 pages until this lab fire that Superboy puts out with his super breath causes Lex to lose his hair. Lex is upset about that. He blames Superboy, thinks Superboy was jealous of him and his scientific achievements. They become enemies. So yes, there is some basis in the comic books for a past between, the character and Lex being in Smallville. However, the show is able to add so much to actually make Clark and Lex friends, true friends, to the extent that Lex is capable of that. Your answer may vary on this. I would say definitely for 3 seasons, maybe 4.
3, yeah. I would say 3. Yeah.
I would say 3 as well. But to have that true friendship that's doomed from the start, and that it's doomed from the start and the path that Lex is on. Again, like that's so much, like you said, the richness of the show is that doomed friendship. But then the Lana side of it. Now, of course, yes, Lana has been a long-standing supporting character in the comics, certainly in the Superboy television series, but never to the point of these star-crossed lovers that they are here on the show. I mean, for better or worse.
Yeah,
People
I mean,
have
your
different takes on
mileage
that.
will vary on that. But yeah, to be fair, to your point about this show warping your idea of what relationships are like, when you're a kid, you're like, no, you think this way. Like, I'm going to be with this girl forever, man. And like, so yeah. Now, about 7 years in, Clark, you got to figure it out. But that's fair. And yeah, I mean, Lana Lang was a character who had appeared in the movies, who appeared in other shows and stuff. But like for this prominence, I mean, there was a Superboy show, but even that was like, didn't really go in deep in relationship stuff because it's the nature of that show didn't allow for that sort of thing. But yeah, this one, I mean, she's a lot of like, it's so interesting because so many, as you were talking about, so many people just found this show with no knowledge of Superman. So they watch this and they're like, oh, well, clearly they're the end game, right? I mean, the show certainly makes you think that for years, right?
Yeah, I've encountered some of those folks online, and it's like, oh, I don't know how to break it to you. I mean, but that's the thing. I mean, and for people who really just watch this show, I know there is a contingent out there who feel he should have ended up with Lana. Now, I don't agree for a variety of reasons, and we'll talk more when we do our ships episode, but still the fact that the show is able to make that pairing so compelling for so long, for so many people, it really is something. But also there is something so, I think like so clever and subversive about setting up your show, a large part of your show around this romance that we all know is doomed. But it's subversive because, again, when you look at it in the context of the shows around it, it's like Everwood, you have Ephraim and Amy. One Tree Hill, you have Luke and Peyton. I mean, spoiler alert, but like they end up together in those shows, and here they don't. And so there's something, there was this tragic quality inherent in this, and that, you're watching the rise of one character, the fall of another, and then again, the collapse of this romance. Again, just from the jump, I think there was so much there, so much rich potential for storytelling that for the most part, I do genuinely think they capitalized on, even again, recognizing that it, that has ups and downs.
Yeah, no, you gotta have a good sense of humor about it too, right? I mean, I think anyway, I think it's healthy to be able to laugh at the stuff you love, as we often do on our podcast, and we have done together as well. So
yeah, absolutely. The other thing I have to say, actually, let me ask you this. We're talking about how the show affects us personally. And if you don't mind my asking, like when you watch episodes or rewatch, like do they elicit an emotional reaction? Not that you're like sitting there sobbing. Like, do they elicit anything like that?
I mean, yeah, sometimes I get kind of like fired up about certain things. Like, oh yeah, that's great. Like, I mean, obviously the ones that hit me hardest where I did, get, I'm thinking like first run now, rewatching, definitely first run, a lot of emotional reactions and stuff. Rewatching now, I mean, obviously law of diminishing returns, right? But I'll talk about a couple things if I may. I mean, one in particular, and this is a terrible episode, Reaper season 1. This kind of ties into like kind of your life and stuff, right? Whitney's dad is sick and he doesn't want to go see him like in the hospital. And Clark's like, hey, like Clark goes and talks to him like, hey man, you need to go see your dad. He's like, I don't want to remember him like that, man. And Clark's like, I take the man over the memory any day of the week. And, my grandfather, I love my grandfather. My grandfather was kind of my Jonathan Kent in my life, right? And he lived with us for several years. And then we had, he went in a nursing home near the last few years of his life to take care of him. And he lived into his 90s though. So he had a good long life. But I would think about that when I go see him all the time. You know, I would think about that silly scene and that silly episode of Smallville. I'm like, hey, you take the man over the memory any day of the week, and it's so true, right? And those are life lessons from this show in one of their worst episodes, right? So it's just kind of that's the kind of like that gets you in the feels, that sort of thing, right? So that's a life lesson from the show. And then there's other, more like surface level fun stuff that kind of elicits an emotional response. Like I remember distinctly, when you start talking to the TV, they got you good, right? So like in Asylum, where like the power goes off and you think Lex is saved, and then the power goes back on and he gets the electroshock therapy. I was like, no, like I literally killed the TV because that's going to be a factor with him, getting warped in his mind and all that stuff. And I think it was, if you talk about the show and that sort of thing. And then especially like, all the stuff with like little kid Lex, like it's season 7, where he's like, I was your best friend. I'm your best friend, Clark. And Clark's talking to him like, I'm always going to look out for you. I'm like, oh man, why am I getting teared up at this, at the Superman show for sure. And then especially again, I guess tying into my first point, I think I said 2 and I went on to like 5, sorry. But like when he's talking to Jonathan Kent, like in the other Earth, he's like, you didn't have any powers, but you were my hero and all that stuff. I'm like, oh man, like you can just put yourself in that situation, like talking to whoever that is in your life, and like feeling that. And man, like that will still make me emotional watching that stuff, especially nowadays because my grandpa since passed away. So, but anyway, like again, fun superhero stuff to get you excited, seeing Clark jump off of a missile, get you fired up, and then the emotional stuff. And that's what we're talking about. This balance this show has and finds those areas to speak to you to. And there you go. That's my answer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, look, I'm not ashamed to admit, man, rewatching these episodes, I teared up a lot. Like I teared up so many moments, and most of them had to do with the parental side of it, the Jonathan and Martha moments. And I talk about this all the time, but like, since becoming a dad, like my perspective has shifted a lot. And watching the show now, whereas the first time around, same age as Clark, I'm viewing it through Clark's eyes. And now I watch it and I see it more from like Jonathan's perspective. And even again, going back to that hothead episode where Clark wants to play football, and Jonathan has a moment at the end where he's like, it's not that I don't trust you, right? Like I trust you, but I worry for you, right? Like there's that fear. And that's one of the things over these past 5 years since being a dad. It's like, it's the greatest fear I've ever known, right? Because the thought of anything ever happening, it's like that you can't control. It's so tough. But on the other side of it, it's like a strength that you've never known as well. Because it's like, I know there's nothing I wouldn't do. And along those lines, there's that moment in the premiere of season 3 when Jonathan makes the deal with Jor-El to go get Clark back, who's hopped up on Red K, tearing up Metropolis. And Jor-El says to him, would you sacrifice anything to bring him back? And Jonathan says, yes, for my son, I'll do anything. And it's like, that's the sort of thing where the first time around, I'm sure it had an impact when I watched it, but it's like, I watch it now and it's like, yes, of course. It's like, there's literally nothing I wouldn't do. So, stuff like that really resonated. And then another Jonathan moment from Legacy, that episode that I had to tape when I was a kid. But it's that scene at the graveyard where Jonathan goes to visit his father's grave. And Clark is there. And this is, Jonathan has made the secret deal with Jor-El to bring Clark back. And what Clark doesn't find out until the season finale is that the deal was he'd have to give Clark back to Jor-El at a certain point. But in this episode, like Jonathan's really talking about regrets and missed opportunities, and he's really going through it. And when they're at the grave, like Jonathan's talking about his own father. And he's like, he was so stubborn. He's like, he never would have turned his back on his son like I did to you after the events of the end of season 2.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
He's like, I wish I had his strength and his wisdom. And it's like, to see Jonathan, like to see his fallibility and questioning himself. I don't know. There's so many moments like that. And credit where credit's due to Martha as well. Start of season 4 when Clark's been reprogrammed as Kal-El. And the moment right before he takes flight, right? And she's banging on his chest and she's like, give me my son back. It's like, you feel that frustration. And then the words of Bridget Crosby, Margot Kidder's character later, where she's like, the only thing that can triumph over a father's will is a mother's love. And gives Martha the black kryptonite, which she uses to save her son. It's like, the three of them, right, as a unit, as a team, working together, especially over those early seasons. It just, and like you said, having that in stark contrast to the Lionel Lex dynamic, it's just amazing and just very resonant.
Yeah, no, powerful stuff. And then in Memoria too, it's to speak of the mothers, like that last scene again, it all coming together. The needle drop with Maya Mortal from Evanescence, which can you get more 2000s than Evanescence? No, you can't.
No.
And then, but it's Martha. It's like, oh, Laura, that was your first word, and now we know what it is. Like, anyway, it's incredible stuff, and they're hugging, and it's the show. I mean, it was about fathers and sons mainly, right? But it did have its spotlights on the mothers as well, like Lillian, right? Which is interesting because you're like, you hear about Lex talk about his mom all the time. You get the idea like he kind of like has nominated his mom for sainthood just because she passed away at a young age. And you kind of see her over the flashbacks. Like, I mean, Lionel's a bad dude. Don't get me wrong, right? But Lillian was messed up too, to the point where she killed her own son. I mean, yes, to like keep Lionel from turning him against Lex and stuff, but like, y'all, come on. And I mean, what a Memoria top 5, top 3 episode of this show. Thinking about that because we're talking about the end of that episode, for example. But like, anyway, but there were a lot of good moms on Smallville. I don't want to highlight the episode where the mom kills the son, but my point being, I guess, Lillian is like this one. He's like, before my mother died or after my mother died, right? I wish I had done a counter on that. I have a tally board on my podcast of like certain things and lines that are said. I wish I had said after my mother died, because he must say that 50 times. But you're like, oh man, Lex's life would have been fine if his mother hadn't died. I'm like, I don't know. Like, she had some issues too, y'all. Which is but then and that's why I get emotional when you see Kid Lex so much, right? Because Kid Lex is doing the right thing. Kid Lex takes the fall for his mom to protect her from his dad. I mean, that's a heroic thing to do. He gets beat up for it. He blocks the memory for it. His dad doesn't love him. I mean, like, Lex has gone through a lot, and that's again so fascinating about the journey of the show. Like, I don't know, like, had somebody shown Lex some true love? Like, would he have turned evil? A legitimate question, I think. It's a legitimate question. We all know his destiny was to be bad, quote unquote, but like, this Lex, I don't know.
I agree. And that's another devoted episode that we'll have here, looking at Lex's downfall. And I think that's kind of the central question, because I think, Lana says him at the end of season 6, you're not capable of love. I do think, unfortunately, that's true, especially by that point.
By that point, yeah.
And it's like, but could he have been capable? Would he have been capable had he been shown some? I mean, again, you go back to that magnificent pilot and just that contrast between the love that the Kents show this baby they find versus the disgust on Lionel's face. When he sees his balded son, right, curled up in the field there. So again, so much that the show is able to mine. So kind of like on this big picture notion of Clark's journey, and because over the years I'll doing this podcast, that's kind of the big thing that I've always come back to with holding up Smallville. It's like, well, they took the character on a journey, and that's what I was really curious to kind of try to piece together in tracking his evolution over the course of the series. And I think one of the things that makes it interesting is that the creators of the show, Al Gough and Miles Miller, they leave after season 7. And even before that, they've talked about having a 4 or 5 year plan. So I think there comes a point, even in their tenure, the Alan Miles years, where they're beyond kind of where they really know where they're going. And then you have this whole other iteration. So it becomes this thing when you look at the 10 years, it's hard to say really that the show, I think the show always knew like where it would end, generally speaking, with Superman. But in terms of how it got there, it's like, again, I don't know that there was kind of that plan across the 10 seasons, but then to sort of look at how things fit together and instances where I feel like the show is commenting on itself, which we'll talk about. I think it gets particularly fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it was a victim of its own success, if you want to call it that, because I'd say the first 3, 4, 5, or 4.5-ish seasons, they were moving towards something, ups and downs. So they were moving towards something. The 100th episode, huge milestone, right? And then they're like, hey, we're going to keep going. And they're like, oh, well, I guess we can keep, sure. Yeah, we can come up with some more stories. And then I affectionately call seasons 5 to 7 the college dropout years, because he's stalled as a character, right? And then they pick it back up in season 8. We get that soft reboot of the show, and he goes on that way. But it's hard to it's almost like any character progression. You push pause halfway through season 5, and then you pick it up again in season 8. And we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna chart it out here, but I think we'll find as we hit our big points, you're not gonna find a lot after Reckoning and before Odyssey.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Now, you and I have both talked a lot about the eras of the show. And I feel like, look, you can carve it up in a number of different ways. You could be like, seasons 1 through 7, the Alan Miles years or the Lex years, and then 8 through 10. I think you and I look at it similarly. I really do look at the first 4 seasons and the first half of season 5, like the first 100 episodes, as really the first main era of the show. And then I look at the second half of 5 through 7, similarly to you, as the college dropout years, where Clark is really wrestling with the loss of not just his father, but his broken friendship with Lex. Lana ends up embarking on a relationship and marrying Lex. It's a difficult time where a lot of that support system that he had is gone. But yeah, there definitely does give you that sense of stalling there. And then seasons 8 through 10, where the original creators of the show had left, we have new showrunners, and now we're moving the show and the character forward. Much of the action shifts to Metropolis. He adopts this proto dual identity of the red blue blur and then later the blur, and we're taking those steps moving forward to where we'll ultimately end up.
Part of me wants to even say 4 is this weird outliner, honestly, because 1 to 3 I mean 1 to 3 is a cohesive, like, this could still be like a prequel to most Superman iterations if you want to do it that way, more or less. Okay, 4 is like, in addition to whatever my feelings are about it it's a departure from what had been 1 through 3, but you still got to, fold it in with the first 3 because it's the high school years, right? But it feels very different. It feels very different than season 3 and season 2 and season 1, frankly. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? They thought it's what they needed to do at the time, and fair enough, they got 6 more years. So who am I to say? Right? But you can't ignore that, like, it's a weird, like, outliner there. Plus the arrival of Lois Lane is just, monumental of the show. Now, I feel, as you've heard me say many times, it took them about 4 years to figure out what they're going to do with Lois Lane and let her be Lois Lane. But nevertheless, she was there on the show, and that's a game changer. And they certainly lean into that in season 4, which is why that also feels like this, like, a turning of a chapter or a subchapter, if you will, because the arrival of Lois Lane and he's flying now, and all these things are going on. But you gotta, if you're truly trying to do eras, chapters, volumes, 1 through 4 fit together, 5 through 7 fit together, and 8 through 10 fit together to me.
Fair. I think 1 through 3, I think that really represents their clearest vision of what the show is and what they want to say.
Smallville in its purest form, Anthony.
It really is. And Alan Miles have talked about, right, the central questions that were kind of guiding those original seasons, like, who am I, where am I from, where am I going, right? And I think you see that. I think season 4, this quest for the stones that will ultimately lead to the fortress, I feel like they knew they wanted to get to the fortress, but then this just became a way to get there, right? But anyway, those kind of 3 main areas, it's kind of how I look at the show. But yeah, I mean, this journey that Clark goes on from this young man who is trying to keep his secret, right, who just wants to be normal, who protects the people closest to him, who is trying to find out where he comes from, and when he does, is met with the realization that possibly he was sent there to be this conqueror. Kind of wrestling with that to, again, this middle period of the show where, as he literally says at the beginning of season 6, in the final scene with Martha, he's like, I don't know where to go from here. And I feel like that kind of represented, the show as well, where, he's just living this life of a farm boy. And the show gives him objectives like rounding up the escaped Phantom Zoners in season 6 and looking after Kara in season 7, right? But it doesn't feel like we're taking those next steps. And then again, getting into the final seasons, where now it goes beyond just protecting the people around him, waiting for trouble to show up at his doorstep, as Oliver charges in season 6. But like, now he's actually actively out there patrolling, working at the Daily Planet, developing this dual identity, and then finally taking that step into the light, even though, CGI by the time that happens, but well, it is what it is. But again, like, really looking at it, I think there is that arc for the character. Even though, again, there are, like we said, ebbs and flows to it, but he has a place to go. Final question from Brian here that feeds into what we're talking about. So Brian says, I would appreciate it if you could take the time and trace Jor-El's characterization through the series. Even if it's somewhat headcanon, how did we get from rule them with strength and you will obey me, Kal-El, to the line from the finale. I ask you to remember one thing. Your abilities may be of my blood, but it is your time in Smallville with Jonathan and Martha Kent and all the people there that made you a hero, Kal-El. So that's a big question that I think will fuel the rest of our talking. But I guess, what sort of a through line do you see, I suppose, in terms of how Jor-El is depicted across the series?
Well, if you get a head candidate somehow to make this all make sense, right? The Jor-El that Clark talks to in seasons 2 and 3 and 4 are this AI computer program, and it's just all numbers and calculations and that sort of thing, and there's no humanity in it, right? Then you get to the Fortress, and he is nicer in the Fortress. Like he's like, so he's still the same guy, but he's a little nicer. I think, yeah, I think anyway. But then there's always these major things that are happening, and Clark's like not handling them very well, and Jor's like, "Hey, what are you doing? Like, if you like Bizarro or you do like Kara or any of these things, he's sending him on these side quests or these things, right?" And I'm like, okay, so they have this stable relationship, sort of. It's not antagonistic because 2 through 4, let's say antagonistic. He's like choking Jonathan Kent, and he's branding Clark, and like the whole message in the ship, rule him with strength. I'm like, yeah, what's that about? So then you get to like 8, 9, and 10. He's basically like the Marlon Brando version. Like, hey, go get him, Clark. Very supportive. Until season 10, like, oh no, wait, you're darkness. You're not my son anymore. Like, okay, that was strange. And at the end, he says the line that he says that you read there. It's kind of all over the place. And you can to the show's credit, like you said, commenting on itself. They have like Julian Sands show up in a hologram. He's like, oh, yeah, I took my ego and humanity out of this program because I feel like my humanity is what failed you and failed Krypton. So here you go. Here's a computer program. I'm like, okay, at least the show knows that it changed gears a few times. That's the best way I can explain it. It seems to be the best way they explained it. I just think it was really interesting when it was an antagonistic Jor-El. And that's a new, fresh take. And, there's Jor-El and there's Lionel, right? The evil fathers, both of them have to overcome. Like, that's brilliant. Good job, Smallville. Something new to the mythology. Because why does Krypton have to be this amazing place? Like, they can be a bunch of jerks. Totally fine, right? But I think, and to go outside the universe for a second, Superman Returns was coming out, and they're like, you guys got to get in line with that movie. And they're like, well, we were doing a thing here. Well, you can't do that thing anymore. You got to do something else. I'm like, well, okay. And I feel like that was the outside reasons they changed, because I think that was a really interesting thing they could have done with him having to like, okay, like I'll wear like this S or whatever, but like I don't like Kryptonians because whenever they show up, he's fighting them anyway. So why make them this nice, happy planet they're all sad blow up? Make them a bunch of conquerors, right? Do it much like in recent days, My Adventures with Superman, right?
Yeah,
they did that. They could have done. That's a nice middle ground. So those are my thoughts on the changing Jor-El over the course of the years. It is extremely comical when you lay it out like that, as you did in that message, where we started and where we ended, right?
Yeah, I mean, in my rewatch, I hit essentially every Jor-El appearance, whether it was the voice of Jor-El or the Julian Sands appearances as well.
Who, by the way, rewatching the show for my podcast, I really like Julian Sands as Jor-El. I think I in my earlier days recording, I probably laughed like, what is this guy doing, right? But no, he did a good turn as Jor-El, and I respect him for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, once again, I think this kind of feeds into, did they have a series-long plan firmly in place when they gave us that initial message in the ship in season 2 of rule them with strength? No, I really don't. And I think you see attempts over the course of the series on the show's part to kind of smooth it out to the extent that it works. I don't know. Your mileage may vary. I think there's a lot that we can chalk up to with respect to Jor-El's tough love approach to Kryptonian ways generally, but more specifically, the fact that this is an AI program. And to your point, I think when you get to that message of Julian Sands and Helen Slater as Jor-El and Lara, and he explicitly says, and this is all the way in season 10, but I sent you, this program with none of my ego, right?
Right. That's the word he uses. Yeah.
So this idea that clearly what is represented in that AI program is not all of the man there. So I think that helps a lot. I also think too, the moment in season 5 when Jor-El possesses his oracle, Lionel,
Yes.
when Clark is resurrected after he's lost his powers and he's shot and killed, and then he wakes up in the fortress, and Jor-El, through Lionel, explains that he's been brought back, but of course there's this price that has to be paid. Someone close to him will lose their life. But Jor-El says, "I love you," in that scene and embraces him. And so I think there's this element of when there's, this human form involved, like we're beyond just this disembodied voice. There's a little something else there that's kind of unlocked. And then hand in hand with that, this isn't a matter of possession and puppeteering someone, but John Jones, like when Martian Manhunter enters the picture and he's this associate of Jor-El, right? Yeah. And he was sent here on Jor-El, at Jor-El's request to keep an eye on Clark. And, when he imparts his wisdom and kind of sheds a little bit of light, on Clark's journey, again, it's definitely with a gentler approach. And so I think that when you go just beyond the realm of the pure voice, there are some different flavors there. And then the whole rule them with strength thing, they tried at the start of season 10, Lazarus, when Clark's, in limbo there in between life and death. And Jor-El's like, "I told you to rule them with strength, but you chose the martyr's path." It's like, all right. It's one of those things where it's like, all right, they acknowledged it. Like they didn't forget, but right. I don't know if they give you a true answer.
It's kind of the same energy as talking about Julian Sands Jor-El's the Candor, that flashback in season 9. And you see he has this we call it the table of continuity, I think, on the podcast when we talked about it, because it's got the orb from season 8, and then it's got like the stones of power all there. I'm like, what? It's got the octagonal disc. Or like, okay, this doesn't track at all, but I appreciate you acknowledge that some attempt needed to be made to explain all these things. So good on your show. Like I will just salute you and we move on, because I understand creative teams have come and gone and we're hundreds of episodes in, and it's not going to track, and it's fine. So to your point, like them at least try, unlike things like Veritas, were like, forget continuity, don't worry about it. That's a huge breach. Something like Krypton, I'm like, and I think also what you said, they had no idea they were going to go as long as they did. They thought, this would be a cool thing to throw in here in season 2, and then having to deal with that for 8 more years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the first season, in the pilot, right, of course, Clark learns that he's from another planet when Jonathan shows him the ship. So that's when he learns why he's different, that he comes from another planet. But that's the extent of the information that he has in the first season.
Can I ask you this? I mean, this ties into kind of the question and what we're going to talk about here, which is funny. I think we've talked so long, I got to go through the journey as it is. But would you have wanted to hold off on the Krypton Jor-El stuff for a while? Because and maybe you feel the same way in all of your, assimilation of Superman content. I am kind of Krypton out, to be honest. And that's why I find something like Adventures of Superman with George Reeves kind of refreshing, where it's like he's just a dude doing stuff and we're not worrying about talking to spaceships and all the Phantom Zones and all that. It's so I think it's so easy to lean into Krypton stuff. It's kind of nice when he was like, wasn't really sure who he was for a while. And again, they didn't know they were going to go 10 years. But if you did, maybe wait till like season 3 or 4, or maybe the formation of the Fortress to find out all your stuff. Like you can know you're an alien, of course. But like you go for him to be talking to Jor-El in the season 2 finale when a show lasts 10 years is a little soon. Yeah.
I'm sure, right? Had they known they had a 10-year runway, I think there's a lot that would have happened far. I think Fortress would have been later. I think Jonathan's death would have been late. I mean, I think there is a lot that would have been late. So I don't know. It's hard to say. Like at the time, I didn't feel as if, this is too soon. But yes, looking at it in the context of the entire series, because there is something quaint. It almost sounds like I'm being condescending, and I don't mean it that way. But like, there's something very endearing to me about the fact that the cliffhanger for season 1 is Clark running into a tornado to save Lana, right? It's not Jor-El trying to control him, or Jor-El sticking him in a wall and reprogramming him, or him in the Arctic, or him in the Phantom Zone. Like it's none of that. It's this force of nature, this natural event that he's trying to protect this girl he loves from. Like that's it. Like there's something about that's really appealing. And if we could have lived in that space a little bit longer, I would have been on board with that.
Yeah. But that's really, I mean, talking about his journey throughout the show, right? When the show starts, he knows he's strong. He knows he's fast. That's kind of all he knows, right? I mean, you forget, like, it's funny, you go down to like a Hug, where it's like, I guess I'm bulletproof. Because of course he wouldn't be shooting himself with a gun to figure out if he was bulletproof or not. He just wasn't fast enough to dodge all these bullets, and he has these bruises, and they track him healing faster, because that's something that didn't really occur to me. Like, how would he know? that he was bulletproof. And that's what I love so much about My Adventures with Superman in season 1, where he like jumps in front of a lot of these guns that are shooting Lois. She's like, "Did you know you were bulletproof?" He's like, "No, but I know you weren't." I'm like, "Oh, look at that. Look at that." But he's searching on the internet for like fast people and stuff when we first see him. But really, that's, I guess, he getting hit by the car. Maybe his big first, like, maybe there's something more to me than just I'm fast and strong, right?
Yeah.
Lex's car.
Yeah, no, I think very much so. And then, of course, very early on, he gets his X-ray vision, and it's funny when
he floats too, Anthony.
Yes, he does float. Yeah.
Are we gonna don't forget?
Yeah, he floats in metamorphosis. He wakes up above his bed, and the first of a number of teases of flight that we would get, but true flight by Clark himself, not Kal-El or anything else.
Kal-El can fly. Clark Kent is still earthbound. Yes.
Yeah, we'll get that at the very end, but. Again, in terms of the originality of the show and maybe some deviations from the mythology, staggering the manifestation of his powers the way that they do here and tying them into puberty. I mean, heat is the clearest, I think, best example of that, where when he is sexually aroused, his heat vision is activated. But I like that. I mean, and especially those first 3 seasons. Again, like each season, he got a new power. Then they kind of didn't know what to do for a couple of seasons. Then they remembered super breath in season 6.
Well, you kind of count flight for season 4. All right. It's not Clark. That was the loophole that they found. But no, I always enjoyed a new powers episode.
Yeah. Fair to say Heat was your favorite?
Yeah. No, I love Heat. He is one of my favorite episodes of the show. For many reasons, but I think it was just a really clever reinvention of because I was like, how are they going to do heat vision on Smallville? Like, it's going to be red beams and stuff. And I think when they first did the heat waves, I was a little disappointed. I was like, what? But then I was like, no, that's actually really smart. So I liked the heat vision, but I like the X-ray vision too. Like if you chart the course of him getting these powers, like every time they introduced them, other than superheroing, which we'll talk about, but like I think they nailed it, and it's the best the powers have looked because technology again had finally caught up to what we could do, what we've been reading in the comic books for years and wanted to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I also have to give a shout out in that X-ray episode, and I posted about this, but one of my favorite Pete Ross lines where they're showing up to investigate Tina Greer, the shapeshifter, and Pete's giving Clark a hard time, and Clark's like, "Remind me again why we're friends." And Pete's like, "Because even when I think you're whacked, I still show up ready to rumble." And I'm like, "Yeah, man, like that's Pete." But
justice for Pete Ross. Yeah,
justice for Pete Ross. I'm not giving that up.
But yeah, it was the order they released him as, or released them in, the order he developed the powers was interesting, right? Because X-ray, that's one of the first ones, one of the very first episodes, and I think it's a really strong episode. It's always fun how that, like, often the power would tie directly into what they were encountering. Like, oh, I got to be able to see somebody's skeleton. Good thing I got X-ray vision this week. But then, and they had talked about, I think, introducing that in the pilot, but it was just too much. And I'm glad they delayed that a little bit, heat vision. I think that's a smart one to delay because I think Rob O'Connor has mentioned this, and I've mentioned him mentioning it as well. I think you might have mentioned it on one of your podcasts. If you're going to take away one power from Superman, heat vision is the one to take away because, like, dude, he could do everything else. It's really going to be able to shoot you with lasers, from far away.
It's fair because the rest of the powers are just enhanced versions of natural abilities. He's stronger, he's faster, he can hear better, he can see through things is really taking it a step far. But still, it's like an enhanced vision.
He can blow air faster and cooler. Yeah,
right.
Sure.
But just like emanating beams of heat. I know it is. Yeah, it is a bit of an outlier in that respect. I hear him.
Yeah, because the heat vision, it gets so early. When we're watching at the time, we're like, oh, it's so cool. He's got heat vision. And then you're like, oh, wait, there's 8 more years. But you laying it out the way you did there, like, you're right. Like, it is kind of, it is unique that he get 1 a year and that sort of thing. And I remember, I don't know who said it, Al or Miles, in some interview way early in the show. They're like, yeah, we can do all kinds of stuff. Like, maybe one day he comes downstairs and he's green. And I'm like, that would have been great. But you never, like a temporary power, But they never did that, other than in season 9 when Jor-El gives him telepathy, which is weird. But anyway, that would have been kind of fun to see because the equivalent is like, oh, pimples, right? Or something like that. That's the equivalent of what that would be. But it was, again, that is that showed you, because on the Superboy fan journey you've been on, you want to see like some like A to B journey instead of just being fully formed. And that's what this does for the character, right? Yeah, he's not He's not, doesn't have all his powers at the very beginning. And when he gets them, those are some of the most fun episodes because he's got to figure out how to use them.
Yeah.
That's fun.
And the Kents are there for those first three in particular to help him and to help train him. And
with some great needle drops like Junkie XL's A Little Less Conversation. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, like, so, that aspect of it, again, I think the emotional journey is what's the most interesting, but again, there's the physical side of it as well. And again, that it is tying in with what's going on in the episode. Like, again, in Heat at the beginning of season 2 is, they have this very attractive young science teacher. Mm-hmm. And they're going through this heat wave, and he's in class with Lana and with Chloe and with his teacher, and he's excited, right? And the beams emerge, and leads to some humorous moments, like when Jonathan is training him, in that moment there, and they're standing together out in the field, and he's like, all right, think about what you did when it first happened, and then Jonathan has this moment, he's like, I should leave, shouldn't I? Like, or it'd be better if I weren't here. But yeah,
that's a very well balanced episode. It's one of the funniest episodes of the show, I think.
Yes.
Heat. Yeah.
No, I agree. Now, just jumping back to season 1 for a second, I think just in terms of like key Clark moments, I really do think, and you mentioned Leech, the episode where his powers are transferred to a classmate. I think that was a pivotal one for him because, and it's not the last that he'll talk about wanting to be normal or wanting to be human, but he actually gets to experience it in that episode. And, you see how free he is and how happy, and he plays a game of basketball and loses and gets knocked around, but he's so happy because he can play, right? He doesn't have to worry about getting hurting someone else. But he still feels responsible for his abilities. And there's this acknowledgement between him and his parents at the end of how special Clark is for not abusing the power. And then he also has this line to them about how Eric didn't get his two most special abilities, Jonathan and Martha, right? So I really think that's a key episode to allow him to see what it is like to have what he had always wanted, but still feel that responsibility. And again, that recognition of how unique he is, as well as why he is that way because of his parents. So like that to me was definitely a key one that really stood out.
No, that's one of my favorite lines of the show. It gets the heart of the character because Eric Summers, who has his powers, like, come on, Clark. If you had the power to do anything, what would you do? And he's like, I would stop people like you. I'm like, yes. Even without the powers, he would do that. And as he proves many times over the course of the show. So, I mean, that's huge. I think that's a really big turn for him. Of course, he would lose his powers on and off over the course of the show, but this is the first big one. Like, what if Clark didn't have powers? That's like the elevator pitch of this episode. And I think they delivered.
Yeah. Another key one. We don't have to, I mean, we'll move past season 1, but Rogue was another key one. That was the first one that wasn't a freak of the week. And you have this rogue or a dirty cop who sees Clark using his powers and, tries to use that to extort the Kents. And so just this theme that will be so dominant throughout the series of him trying to preserve the secret, right? Like here's our first instance where that is threatened, and to see the Kents kind of rally around each other is great, and leads to another Jonathan Kent moment that was such a standout to me when he's framed and he's in jail and Clark goes to visit him, and they have the moment about kind of keeping your temper in check, and Jonathan talks about how he struggles with that himself, and I just love that moment between them. But just kind of this idea, because such a big part of the show, right, of the secret, and certainly you see that manifest in the relationships, romantic and otherwise, with the people around him. But that was another one.
Yeah, also that's one where like he can't just fight his way out of it. He can't throw a person 20 feet and solve the problem, which informs the most interesting conflicts I feel Superman has in the future with Lex and having all the power and the, like this guy has a badge and he has the Metropolis PD, so he has that worldly power that Superman can't fight, which is a great opponent for him, right? So that was such a refreshing episode because again, it was the first non-meteor freak, and it shows you the potential when they could move out of that formula.
Absolutely. Is there anything else you want to say about season 1?
Yeah, I guess Nicodemus would be one I had noted here because, for a couple of things, him and Lana kiss for the first time. She doesn't remember it, but he does. So that's a big moment. That's a big moment. You can overlook it when you're thinking about the course of the show, but that's a big moment for them. And then also that's when Jonathan is in the hospital and Clark kind of paraphrases Superman the movie, where he's like, all those abilities, there's nothing I can do to help him, which is, to quote Superman the movie, all those powers, and I couldn't even save him. We're like, man, are they gonna kill Jonathan this early? Because we didn't know back then. This is new territory. We're like, maybe they would. We didn't know. So I think him at least verbalizing or coming to that realization. They're like, oh, I'm Superman, but I can't save my dad here, right? And that obviously comes into play much later. But I think that's a big step for him as well. And then finally, Tempest runs into the tornado, not knowing if he can fly or not. Felt like he was flying, as we find out, but we didn't know. I mean, you talk about emotional reaction, man. Like when I was watching that season 1 finale, I'm like, oh my God, what are we going to, like, how are we going to survive the next 3 months? Not knowing what happens in this tornado. But that's a huge moment for the fans and for Clark, I think.
Yeah, that is, again, such a standout there. Early in season 2, not only do you get the development of the heat vision, but also he reveals his identity to Pete when Pete discovers his spaceship, which had been activated at the end of season 1. And I always wish that the show had more to do with and for Pete, but I think bringing him in was great. And it's funny, like there's an instance where when I watched the show originally, I had never read any pre-crisis comics. And now it's like, oh, like there was this whole thing with Pete in the comics where he knew that Clark was Superboy, but he kept it to himself and would just kind of help him. And that's obviously not the track that the show takes here. And I'm glad, like, I like that they have that, that openness now between the two of them. And, it's a big thing for him to let Pete in on it. And of course, his parents try to talk him out of it. And then he has that moment where he races in front of the car and stops it. And I love what I was able to kind of open up for that friendship there. He becomes a little sidekick for a bit.
No, it was a huge moment. And talking about how like the Arrowverse could evolve things more so than like Smallville, for example. And this was a case of Smallville evolving things. Like I remember when I was watching Arrow in season 2, when he got a mask, I was like, you can do that? You can evolve the character and change from the status quo, because Smallville often, unfortunately, didn't do that. And this was a case of them doing it. Like how many other episodes would be Pete driving away and there'd be a sad song? And like, yeah. But no, he decided, you know what? He's going to be assertive and he's going to tell his friend the secret. Make his oldest friend, known him for years. Like it makes sense. He's not just telling some guy he just met. Right. Of course he does that. You're like, well, why don't you just tell Chloe and Lana later on? But the important thing is like that really opened up possibilities for Pete's character who needed more to do. And they gave him some stuff to do. Always could have had more from Pete. But I think, I think they did a pretty good job, especially in season 2, taking advantage of Pete being in on the secret. And that's a major point in Clark's journey, I think.
Absolutely. And, to the show's credit of like, oh, well, then why doesn't he just tell the other ones? I feel like, especially as we get to the end of season 3, he is ready to tell Lana. And then we have this whole business with Pete being abducted by the FBI agent and being, beaten for information about Clark and, confessing to Clark at the end about like, it's hard, right? Being in this position, keeping your secret. And that keeps Clark from telling Lana the truth. So again, I mean, unfortunately that is Pete's last episode until he makes his brief return later on in season 7. But I appreciated that they at least did that. And when Pete finds out, his initial reaction is not great, right? And this is a great moment where Pete says something about like, would you think I couldn't handle it? And Clark is like, can you?
Yeah.
Because Pete's freaking out, not necessarily because of who or what Clark is, but because Clark hadn't trusted him. And then, they have
been lied to. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is understandable. I agree. I think season 2 in particular, he helps when Clark's on red kryptonite in the very next episode. Right. Unfortunately, he uses his knowledge of Clark against Clark when Pete's infected in the Rush episode and he, plants the red kryptonite on Clark. But helps him out in various ways on a number of missions. When Clark has to give his DNA sample, right? And they break in and Pete's like, why am I here? Out. He's like, I need your spit. Yeah. I mean, like, so that stuff was great. And it is, it is so formative for the character because it's the first instance where he shares who he is with someone beyond his parents. Right. And again, unfortunately,
it's his choice to do so. It's his choice to do so. No one else decides for him or shows something or figures it out. Like he makes an active decision because Clark, a big criticism of Clark on this show, he's a passive character. Well, this is making an active choice, an active decision. I respect that. And I guess, you mentioned the Red Kryptonite episode. Anytime Red Kryptonite pops up, that's a character moment. Kind of it is. And they kind of reset most of it like for the next, because Lana would never talk to Clark again after the events of Red. Let's be real, right? But they kind of like soften it up and they move on. And so like, that's why I don't really have like Red Kryptonite episodes flagged as like big character moments for Clark, of course, his journey over the course of his journey.
I agree. I think they're most interesting to see what Clark wants most, right? Because his inhibitions are gone. So like, what does he pursue? And how does that change over the course of the series? Because we'll have Red Kryptonite pop up a number of times. So I think it's interesting in that respect. And there's certainly fun episodes. But no, to your point, I was thinking about this a lot in rewatching these episodes. It's like, I mean, we get to a point in the series where characters have seen aliens and spaceships. So presumably maybe you would start to think, okay, Clark could be an alien. But at this point, especially, I think the only like logical conclusions you could come to are that Clark has a mental condition or is on drugs.
Clark Kent would have to be on drugs.
Yeah.
To be on drugs, Anthony.
True. Right. But like, and it was, I always think about this too, because like, there's so much more awareness now and openness about mental health issues and things like that. But yeah, it's like if you just observe Clark's behavior in a lot of these episodes when he's not himself, it's like that would be the natural conclusion.
I think it might be in the end of Transference, maybe. Chloe tells me, like, Clark, I think you need to see some help, like professional help. And I think that's the only time they ever broach it. I mean, which is obviously they could have gone into it more, but it's a fair thing to say. Because what is this dude doing? Like, look at his actions over the course of these the Red Kryptonite episodes. But so I don't have that flag as like a big event, but Lineage I do.
Yes.
Because that's when he really starts to find out about his adoption. You talked about the grounded nature of the show. Very powerful scene between him and Chloe, right? Where Chloe is investigating, Clark's history and he gets frustrated with it. And as close friends, you feel comfortable enough to do this, he kind of lashes out at her. She's like, if you want to find somebody's mother, find your own. I'm like, damn. It's one of the meanest things he said. And she cries. She's like, well, I do know where she is. The difference is she's not interested in me, which is like, damn. Like, thing about Chloe's family was like a broken home and like she single dad doing her best. Like, that was interesting and grounded. And they should have left it like that and not did this crazy stuff with their mom. But all that to say, that episode was powerful. And then we find out all the stuff about Lex's, Lucas Luthor's adoption, as we find out, and all that stuff. But I think that's an important moment for Clark as he learns more and more about how his parents found him. And then, of course, we get the flashbacks as well. So a very important episode.
Yeah, that was pivotal. And finding out the role that Lionel Luthor played in faking this adoption. One thing about this that I was thinking about in rewatching is like, and remind me, because I didn't watch all the episodes around. I don't know if this was acknowledged anywhere else, but like, what explanation did Jonathan and Martha give Lionel for why they needed him to manufacture the paperwork for Clark's adoption?
I think they just kind of brush over that. I mean, we're poor farmers or whatever. And
yeah.
I don't think they were wise not to go into detail and just let that, because Lionel, all he wanted was to get that leverage to get the cream corn factory. So he didn't really care.
True. But that's why the Veritas arc makes no sense.
I was going to say in season 7, the 8 flashbacks, he seemed to care quite a bit about where that kid came from. Davis Bloom, he had Davis Bloom over the mansion. He wasn't concerned about this Clark Kent kid.
Yeah, I suppose. Now, I think one of the, other than certainly learning that he's from Krypton and the message from Jor-El at the end, which we'll get to in season 2, but I think the big picture and talking about deviations from the mythology or additions to mythology, season 2 introduces the Kawachi Caves.
Yes, they do.
And this larger idea, and this is, again, in the realm of deviations, this is the aspect of the show that I'm fairly critical of. This, I don't love this notion that Kryptonians walked the earth. That
I agree.
You have these Kawachi caves that tell the story of Naman, who falls from the sky in a hail of fire and will become Earth's greatest protector and battle his brother Sagith and all of this. The fact that you have the caves, the fact that the stones of power, which we'll get to in season 4, were planted there, like all this business. The fact we find out in season 7 that Laura and Kara came to the Kent farm before Krypton exploded to scope it out, to see where baby
left
Kal-El...
a picture there. Left a picture.
I mean, so yeah, let me just toss it to you. I mean, the caves specifically, or just more generally, this idea of Krypton. I mean, Jor-El on his walkabout, which we see in Relic in season 3. Yeah. It's like, I mean, how do you feel about, again, this whole notion of Kryptonians on Earth?
I do not care for it at all. I think it's like shrinking the universe. It's like Kryptonians in general, but especially like Clark's own parents, Kal-El's parents, his cousin, his uncle. Everyone's been to Earth through these portals, and they try to like explain, but they destroyed all the portals because it's odd and stuff. I'm like, all right, whatever, right? that totally takes out the, like, these people are stuck on this planet and it's going to blow up and only one guy can save us and they don't want to listen to him. So the best he can do is save his son. And that's what we got. Like, that's the story. Like, and you didn't need to do it like Smallville. Like, they ran for 10 years. They had to tell stories. They didn't need to tell those stories. You know, like, I just did not care for the Kryptonians on Earth. And I never do. And that's not just a Smallville thing. It's like in general. So that's right. I think it just takes something away from the Superman story, I feel.
I agree. No, I really do. Like, this is something that has come up whenever we talk about the origin, about like how specifically should Kal-El's rocket be aimed. and you get different versions of this in various tellings of the story, right? Like sometimes they fire off the rocket. They don't know where he's going to land. They just have to get him off the planet. Other times, they have Earth in mind generally. Other times, like in John Byrne's Man of Steel, there's an image of the Heartland, right? So it's like, okay, a more specific target in mind. But Smallville goes so far as to establish that the Kents were handpicked. And that, to me, I feel like it removes an element of chance, of fate, that I think is important when you're telling this kind of mythic story. So yeah, I don't like it. I think they really took it too far. I mean, the caves, we know from Talkville that they hated filming there, but I mean, I think as a setting, as a way to kind of tap into this larger picture, there's some kind of appeal there, but maybe they didn't need to go as far as they did. Maybe they could have just had this legend that the Native Americans had told stories about, but not that literally Kryptonians were there and planted the symbols and all of that. Like, I just feel like it went too far.
Yeah, and there was never any proper payoff for that. Like, so how do they know the future? Did we talk about that? No, okay. Now, at the time, I didn't like him. I really don't care for him now. But at least, like, okay, you did the caves themselves, taking away the Kryptonians, right? I'm like, that's just something kind of unique. Like that you were doing your own thing. These geometric shapes and silver things and metallic objects, a star blade and all this stuff. Okay. That's your own stamp on the mythology. And then, as much as I love the Christopher Reeve, Richard Donner movies, it's like, crystals.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, well, that's fine. And then to me, it's amusing to see the show try and meld the two together. It's like, look, I'm going to put this disc in this crystal console, and it's going to, okay, fine. But there was, hey, Smallville had its own identity, and that's part of its identity. Like it or not, the Kawatche Caves are baked into Smallville's identity. So, but there's a huge moment for him finding those caves.
Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. Creator and podcaster Perry Constantine, host of Superhero Cinephiles, has a special offer for listeners of this podcast. Visit percivalconstantine.com/DFK or click the link in the show notes. Fill out the form and then get 2 free novels and 1 free superhero short story. The novels are Vanguard, Heroes Forged, an Avengers-inspired team of superheroes, and Ronin Born, a cyberpunk superhero novel set in a futuristic, fascist Japan. The short story is Omega Knights, Fire and Lightning, a Power Rangers-inspired prequel to an upcoming serial. Take advantage of this offer today, and be sure to catch Superhero Cinephiles on all major podcast platforms. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of 2 of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the caves are a big driver really for, from midway through season 2. I mean, I would say really until the end of season 4, when we get the formation of the Fortress. I mean, I guess they're less prominent in the 4th season, but season 2 and 3, I mean, like, they loom very large.
Who's going to have control of those caves? Lex or Lionel?
Yeah.
It's a big plot line. But right before that, though, I got to say Ryan, the death of Ryan, who Stray in season 1, Ryan in season 2, that was a big moment for Clark, I mean, to really care for somebody like that. And again, that same energy of him not being able to save Jonathan is like not being able to save Ryan. Literally, he runs across the country, gets the best surgeon. There's still nothing he can do. He has to accept that. And Ryan, like, he has that message like, hey, just don't never stop trying to help people, and and watch out for Lex, too. So like that's the whole thing. And you got to think like somewhere in this version, this character's mind, he's thinking about Ryan when he's like talking to these kids and saving everybody. Like, I don't, great moment. Dishwalla's Angels or Devils, another amazing needle drop. The needle drop and the acting and the writing all converging together, like, are why these things are imprinted on my soul.
Yeah.
These episodes and these scenes, right? But I think that's a big character moment for this Clark as well.
No, I agree. Yeah, the Ryan stuff was absolutely heartbreaking. And then, the first instance of seeing Clark in that big brother role. And I think Tom Welling excelled at that. And I think any time throughout the show and you had that dynamic that they were able to tap into was absolutely great. We get to Rosetta in this season, or actually, I guess even before that, we have the Insurgents episode where Martha and Lionel are held hostage. And, I put that on the list, not unlike Tempest. It's like this big act, like this big jump from the roof of the Daily Planet into the Luthor Corp building. And then of course you get that great moment at the end, which, very similar to what we saw at the end of Jitters in season 1, where you have the resolution of this hostage situation, and you have Clark and his parents lovingly embracing each other and reuniting. And again, that stark contrast with Lex and Lionel. But yeah, that jump, I mean, to be in Metropolis, to be on the roof of the Daily Planet, this is a Clark who cannot fly yet. Clearly has this fear of heights, and makes that big jump. Like that was a standout.
No, that was a seminal moment of the show. And we didn't know, we people take for granted the Daily Planet Luthor Corp building. Like, we see these in every episode, the last half of the show, but this was fresh stuff back in season 2. It's exciting stuff.
Yeah.
And to see him jump over it, leaping a tall building in a single bound, Anthony. Great stuff.
And Rosetta, he's having these dreams, and he has this calling, right, to place the octagonal key in the slot in the cave wall. And eventually does, and is downloaded with the Kryptonian language. So now he can make sense of these symbols, and his heat vision goes awry, and he burns a symbol on the barn door. And he gets this message from Dr. Virgil Swan, played, of course, by Christopher Reeve. And they have this meeting, and Swan gives him like this critical information about the planet that he's from, and this message that was sent about Kal-El of Krypton.
I mean, what can you say about that moment? I mean, just outside of the show itself, Christopher Reeve, the once and future Superman, comes on the show, passes the torch to Tom Welling, gets the stamp of approval, and he comes back again in season 3. Like, it's cool enough to like have somebody like that once, but to have him twice, like, oh, that like really like cements him as like a character on the show. And they talk, his legacy on the show goes on and on, Dr. Swan and all that. But a very unique way for him to find out about Krypton and all those things, right? But I think you get a guy like Christopher Reeve, he's like, hey, I'll be on your show. And they found a way to use him perfectly. And to have him convey that information to Clark is new. It's not just some like message from Jor-El coming on telling him this stuff. It's still that like, it has that melancholy, like sad nature, because he even touches the screen. It's like sad because that's as close as he can get to his parents at that point. There's something to that, because he still feels that void in his heart, really, about where he came from and all that. And it was powerful stuff. And then it would be fantastic stuff, but then the icing on top of it is, hey, it's Christopher Reeve, right? To see the two of them together. These days, we take it for granted. We see Tobey Maguire and Tom Holland and all these guys all together all the time. But like, no. You don't understand. When I saw Christopher Reeve and Tom Welling together in 2003, it changed my life, man. You know what I'm saying?
I know, that was huge, right? And Christopher Reeve, he didn't pop up on Superboy. He didn't pop up on Lois and Clark. Like, he showed up here, on Smallville. And that moment was huge. And I think had it been anyone else, I probably would be complaining about the fact that it's just the scientist who tells him,
I had the same thought myself. Yeah.
But to have that passing of the torch, and I don't know, like just the notion that there was this scientist out there who was searching for life out there in the stars and intercepted this message and always wondered what happened to the child that was referenced in that message.
Incredible stuff.
Again, you get into that Veritas arc in season 7, and now the show is trying to tell you that the Swans and the Luthers and the Teagues and the Queens were part of this cabal searching for this interstellar traveler. And it's like,
I don't buy it.
You know. I think what we get here is a lot cleaner and just more epic, like that he is this kind of more of this lone figure, right? As opposed to part of this like secret network that we'll get later.
Well, another big thing about this, and it's kind of the next episode of Visitor. I wish they would have mentioned it here in Rosetta, but like the name Kryptonite.
Yeah.
Right? It's called Kryptonite. Clark's kind of flippant about that when he tells Pete, I'm like, hey, that's my destroyed home planet. But sure, yeah, it's called Kryptonite. Is that with a C or a K? A K. I'm like, dude, that's some heavy stuff just to be thrown out there with some one-liners. But that's to your point earlier about Pete being nervous all the time. He's like, I got to not call it Kryptonite. I got to call it Meteor Rock. I mean, that's a serious concern through the course of the show. And it's interesting to see when they call it Meteor Rock and when they don't, but like to introduce the term Kryptonite here, to have a name, because of course we've been calling it Kryptonite from the start of the show, but the characters don't know that. So that's a huge moment too.
Yeah, no, good call on that. And at the end of Rosetta, Clark.
Oh yes, the
right,
message.
Right,
Yeah.
Clark has this realizes that that piece of the ship that Jonathan had is the hard drive, and they enter it and it activates, and we get more of a message. And that line that we referenced before about rule them with strength. And Clark naturally is horrified. He's like, "What kind of race am I from?" He's like, "I think I was sent here to conquer." And going back to just those Jonathan moments that make me tear up, you know, him offering that reassurance of, you know, I know you're here to be a force for good, not evil. Like, I'm your father. I raised you. But then they embrace, and you know, the camera pans around, and you know,
Jonathan's like, I don't know.
Yeah, which I think was a normal, natural reaction. But I mean, that moment there, that really I think is so huge for Clark, for the show, right? Like this, and to the show's credit, even if they didn't know where they were going with it, and I really don't think they did, but
No idea. No,
it's a great. I mean, it is a great twist, right? Because it's the episode he finds out that he's from Krypton. He's Kal-El from Krypton. That's enough. Right, like you could stop there, but then this foreboding message that, oh, maybe he's here for a nefarious purpose. Like just the idea of that, the suggestion of that, so intriguing. Like that episode would be memorable enough for Christopher Reeve, but I think it's like that ending scene is very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything else that you have before the finale of season 2 or 2-part finale?
No, that season 2 finale when Jor-El tells him it is time.
The day is coming.
The day is coming. I say that still. That's one of these quotable lines from the show.
Yeah. I mean, so this is, again, from that message on the ship, but certainly from the season 2 finale through, like you said, I think we do get a little bit of a shift when the Fortress forms, but he's still pretty hard on Clark, as we see. But like, we're in this era of antagonistic Jor-El, which, again,
I support it.
Yeah, I mean, to the show's credit, I think it's funny. I mean, in the post-crisis comics, it's not like he's regularly communing with Jor-El. In the pre-crisis comics, I know he time travels to Krypton a lot. I feel like that's probably where he has most of the interactions. But I think the thing that we think of most with Jor-El, and that I know obviously the creators of Smallville were drawing heavily from Superman the movie, right? And you think of the floating head in the fortress, but really as this benevolent mentor and teacher, you know, who reminds Superman he's not one of them and all of that, but still a force of good in Kal-El's life. So to turn that on its head here, again, I think was a great twist. You know, payoff, you know, may or may not have justified it, but it's intriguing while it lasted.
Hey, conflict makes stories interesting. So they mined a lot from his conflict with Jor-El. Now, if they had like more than a 5-minute conversation, of course, like, no, I'm not going to do what you want. No. You know, maybe they could have made some more progress of understanding each other. But you know what? He's a moody teenager. He does dumb teenage things. He goes and gets a kryptonite key and blows up his ship, which is like one of the most irresponsible things he's ever done. Yeah. And there are consequences to it, which I respect that he did that. I mean, I can't believe they blew up the ship though. Like to me, like that's sacred material there, the ship. And to think that it's blown up was just, I don't know. I was really surprised by that and disappointed, sort of, because I love the spaceship and all the iterations.
Well, again, it's like if they knew they were going 10 seasons, I feel like the ship would have stuck around, but they were like, we're almost halfway through, blow up the ship.
Yeah, true.
And they do with the kryptonite key that they get, that Lionel had created. He was going to try to use it. And Pete is the one who helps Clark get it. He creates this big diversion in the cave, yelling at Lionel. It's great. Oh, man, Pete.
Best Pete scene, maybe, on the show.
Pete ready to rumble Ross, man.
Don't want to look weak, Mr. Luther. Look at that. Look at that. But no, I mean, what a I mean, put a giant big flag of this of these episodes in Clark's character development. I mean, because it's not only is he's now interacting with his quote unquote father at this point. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. Talk about needle drops though, but was it Matthew Good? Is that the artist? The Weapon, that song that plays in that barn scene between Clark and Lana?
Yeah. The last moment of happiness before it all goes down. It had a Moby song in there too. I think that episode, man, again, like every episode in this era of Smallville, multiple songs, almost every episode that were just classics.
I know. But the blowing up of the ship that he does without telling Jonathan and Martha, and that causes an explosion that Martha is injured in, and as a result, she loses the baby she was pregnant with. I mean, like I said before, the fact that the show allows Clark to make the mistakes that he does is really. I don't want to turn this into a Snyderverse thing, but I think one of the reasons, maybe I did gravitate to that take more was that, I was familiar with a Clark who really struggled and made mistakes and also had an earthly father who wasn't telling him to go out there and do this and that. I mean, in fairness, Smallville's Jonathan does encourage Clark to help people, but it's always under the umbrella of you have to be careful. You have to keep it a secret.
Right.
So in any event, I guess I was more at home in those films than I guess certain other people were.
Well, I'm with you on Jonathan Kent for sure, because the Jonathan Kent I saw in the Snyderverse was the Jonathan Kent I watched for 10 years on Smallville. So I mean, that's the same guy to me. So I'm in alignment with you there. But then to have, we mentioned earlier, when him closing the door on Clark, shutting him out for the first time maybe in their lives, as a family unit's been broken that way, and that forces Clark to go. I mean, not really, but kind of puts him on his way to go to Metropolis, and it's rough.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking, and the fact that this show went there, I think really, I mean, because it's not like Clark was already on the red kryptonite and he made this mistake, or he made this choice and it had these consequences, and he had to deal with it. So, yeah, it was really something. I mean, tying together a little bit here of Jor-El over these next few seasons here. So at the end of season 2, the day is coming. It's time for you to leave Smallville and fulfill your destiny, right? So the crux of it is you need to leave. These people in your life have fulfilled their purpose. This is your time. You need to go. And then, like you said, he brands him, right, with the 8 symbol.
Yeah. Did you think he was going to have that forever, by the way?
No.
I was like, is Clark Kent never going to be able to take his shirt off?
It was a WB show, so I figured they would get around that.
Good call, yeah.
But, you need to leave. He brands him and says, if you don't leave, you'll end up hurting, everyone you love. And, that ends up proving true. And then interestingly, you get to the end of season 3 and then the fake Kara, similar type of message there, where if you don't leave, everyone will betray you. And then over the course of that episode, right, he finds out that Lex has the secret room on him. Jonathan made this secret deal. Lana leaves. So, Jor-El's warnings, they seem to contain some truth in them. But my question is this, and tying together a little bit here, and just moving us along as we close in on 2 hours here, what does Jor-El necessarily want at this point, right? Because clearly we get to the end of season 3 and he's reborn as Kal-El in season 4, and he begins this quest to unite the stones. So at the end of season 2 into season 3, do we think Jor-El is ready for him to kind of begin that quest? Or is it more, as he says at the start of season 3, just to see if he's ready?
I guess to train, to train the way Christopher Reeve trained for 12 years in the Fortress. I think that's what was going on in the caves. But then, there's no rhyme or reason to this, but maybe because Lex got a stone, that's what woke Clark. But we saw Clark wake up before Lex got the stone, right? You can't make sense of that season 4 plot line. But in my head canon, I guess that's why he came out of the cave early. You know what I'm saying? I don't know, because you think that he would just be there for as long as he needed to be there. And then you come out and hey, I'm Superman, everybody, in theory. Right?
No, see, I don't know. I mean, it's funny that we're trying to make sense of something that I don't think anyone I don't think there's sense to be made of it. This is my read on it, and I could be wrong. I feel like when Clark is pulled into the cave wall at the end of season 3, I don't think that was meant to be the training. I think that was the quote unquote reprogramming of him such that Jor-El could use him as a tool to find and unite the stones to then create the fortress. And then that would be the training period that he would undo. But now, I wonder though, it's like, had Martha not broken Jor-El's hold on Clark at the start of season 4 when he's Kal-El, it's like, would Jor-El have ever quote unquote released Clark, or would he have just had him be Kal-El forever?
Well, he almost acts like Jor-El more than Kal-El, right? I mean, you could just say Jor-El was possessing Clark's body that episode too, but that's not what they did. I don't know. Like, would Clark just go assemble the 3 real quick and then? Yeah, I don't know. I don't have any answers. I think you're right though. The cave was not the training. The cave was the brainwashing, really. You want to call it that, but reprogramming is probably a better way to put it. And then would hopefully have led to the training in the fortress. However long that would have been in this version, we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of what we get from Jor-El in these early seasons, especially. It's very nebulous. It by design, I think, to create confusion for the character, to keep the audience guessing, and also because, again, I don't think they really had a firm answer on this. I think it was just like, you need to leave; it's your destiny. But it's like, for what? And and again, he ends up leaving right under the influence of red kryptonite by his choice. I mean, again, talk about big flags in the sand for the character. I mean, I think that his self-imposed exile when he's running around on red kryptonite and robbing banks and working for Morgan Edge and everything. I mean, that was, I think, a pretty formative moment for the character. I mean, certainly when you think about the relationship with Lana, like that running away and his behavior during that time.
No, absolutely. And then the consequences with Jonathan having to go save him, and that it's the first domino of his heart trouble, which leads to his eventually, leads to his death. Right. Another big one, I guess, meeting Perry White.
Yeah.
It's a big one. Helped him get that job, not in the way we thought, but sort of. It helped him get his job back 6 years later. Love Michael McKean, right? Yeah. Great casting. He should have been on more. He's another Tool's husband. I feel like they could have called in some more favors, but maybe he was too expensive. But hey, I think you could have left it. You could have never seen, now with the show running as long as it did, you did need to see Perry White again. But if the show ended after season 5 without him getting a job at the Daily Planet, that conversation they had on the bus, hey, you want to look me up in Metropolis? He's going to call him. He's going to give him a job. And that's all you needed to know. Now they work again. The show, it ran long enough to kind of like circle back around to things, which is good on you, show. And that's one of those things. But I think you could have left it there and had a good explanation for the future of Clark working for Perry White.
I agree. And then right after that, we get the episode Relic, where again, we find out that Jor-El had this walkabout on Earth in the 60s and had a romantic relationship with Lana's great aunt.
Clark didn't have a chance. It was in their genes.
I know. And of course, Jor-El in that played by Tom Welling. We've joked a lot about how Jor-El goes from looking like Tom Welling to Julian Sands in a shockingly short amount of time.
If you do the math, it's like literally 6 years or something.
I guess I said my piece on this before. Like the notion of any Kryptonian, and especially Jor-El on Earth, to me, it's too far. And it ends with that moment. I remember that moment being very striking at the end of the episode where, through Jor-El's pendant, Clark is having all of these flashes of Jor-El's memories and learns that Hiram Kent, Jonathan's father, had helped him get out of town when he was wanted for a murder that he did not commit. And Clark has this realization. He's like, I don't think it was an accident that my ship landed with you. He's like, I think you were chosen. And it's a striking moment, but like I said, I think it removes that element of chance that you need. That's one thing the show did I really don't like.
I agree. And also it really undercuts the message of the first episode where Clark's like, hey, I'm glad you guys are the ones who found me. Like, we didn't find you, Clark. You found us. I'm like, oh, look, a found family, right? No, my alien dad programmed my ship to land in your field.
I know.
That's not how you want to end your pilot, with that kind of dialogue. So, I mean, that's more, I have a problem with it even more because of that, because it's such a sweet sentiment. It's beautiful. Like, we didn't find you, you found us. No, this episode says no to that. And that, I don't care for that. So
I hear you. I would say, a lot of the Jor-El stuff is kind of on the back burner for season 3, with the exception of, Jonathan's deal, this mysterious deal that he made to bring Clark home. Because in the beginning of the season, we talked about that moment already when he contacts Jor-El. And again, that's where Jor-El says, like, this was a test to see if Kal-El was ready to begin his journey. And it makes no difference if he returns home for now, like something to that effect. So
that's right.
But then that's kind of like this. And the key is calling out to Jonathan throughout the season, and he's able to heal Clark at one point. Jor-El works through him.
That's right.
Like, you had a lot of that going on, but I feel like the larger question of like what Jor-El wants of him was, again, really just kind of
left intentionally vague.
Yeah, definitely.
A couple of quick things though for Clark, like Asylum, right? Clark decides to break Lex out, much like he did with Pete. Like, I got to save my friend, right? So I got to help my friend out. If he finds out my secret, that's the way it's going to be. Decides to break him out. Doesn't go well. The Kryptonite freaks take over and beat him up, and then he can't save Lex. And that's a huge moment for the show and for Clark, I think, not being able to save Lex, and then not being able to tell him after he learned his powers and all that stuff. That was for that, because you kind of see Lex's true character there. It's like, I'll leave Clark alone. He's trying to fight him off, but he can't, and then he gets his mind wiped, and it's just a really tragic situation for them, and he can't save Lex. And I felt like that was a very important part of the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I haven't zeroed in on Lex much here because we'll do a whole dedicated thing on him. But obviously, his story is intertwined with Clark's, and those are such standouts for sure. There's also, again, this will be part of our ships discussion, but Alicia. We have the huge Alicia character in the Obsession episode here, where he meets a meteor freak who they discover each other's powers and embark on this tentative relationship that quickly goes awry when she becomes obsessed and things go to this extreme. But for this, there's a brief moment where it's like he can be himself, though. It's interesting. He knows enough to hold back. He doesn't reveal his alien origin. And I love my favorite Tom Welling moments in that episode is when Jonathan has caught Alicia and Clark in bed after she teleports into his room, and they're in the kitchen. And Jonathan says something like, "What did you tell her about the meteor rocks?" And Clark's like, "No, I didn't." And he's so proud of himself.
Yeah. He kind of stands up straight or whatever.
He's like, "No, Dad, I knew not to do that." That's great.
Oh man, that's great stuff. No, that's Alicia is important. I mean, here and then next season, obviously. So I'm hashtag Team Alicia. Loved her. Wish she would have stayed around. Absolutely. We talked about legacy a little bit, but that kind of continues on the whole thread from Rosetta with more Dr. Swan. Very important. Dr. Swan kind of, it's like they try to use that to kind of soften the message from season 2. It's like, you don't understand. There's another message in the ship. And he's like, well, fathers often want future son reject. I'm like, well, true. That's the kind of the nature. It's the message of this show, which is why you should have stuck with the antagonistic Jor-El, in my opinion. But little did we know that was going to be the last time we saw Christopher Reeve. But he's got that great final scene. It was like, dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
With the disc.
Well, because he has the key, because like it disappears. It looks like it was absorbed into the wall. They don't know. And then it's on his desk, and it's like, what? And, he has this tentative alliance with Lionel, and, clearly they were intending more for him. And, unfortunately he passed away. But yeah, it's like it ends on that note of like, oh my God, like, where are we going with Swan here?
Yeah. Legacy, weaker than Rosetta, not as important, but still a very important marker on the journey, I think. So,
yeah.
I guess then, of course, Memoria.
Yeah.
Memoria, man.
I know.
Huge. The Dave Lara, we talked about it some before, but I mean, that's him learning, him having that flashback, being put in the ship. Huge.
And I think one of the things about it is that, not unlike Relic, where he got to see his father as a man in the world, having this adventure in Smallville and struggling and seeing a different side of his biological father. Similarly here, it's like, what he remembers of Lara is that she was worried about him being loved. Right. And so that's a far cry from the Jor-El who wants me to conquer, so I think getting that other sense of where he comes from and who he comes from. Yeah, really was essential.
He even says that he's like, he always thought of his parents as monsters because of Jor-El, but that changed his mind.
Yeah. And a mother's love never dies, as Martha says. Yeah. Oh man, it's such a great moment.
Hey, before we get to the very end of the season, though, I got to mention Whisper because I've been throwing shade at it for this whole conversation. That's my least favorite new Power episode. They did glasses and they half-assed the glasses, even though, like I said, I based my glasses off of them in high school. They half-assed the glasses. Heat vision making him blind with the kryptonite, and like they rush all this stuff, and like I don't know, and even the effects for the super hearing wasn't that good. It's funny if you look at earlier episodes, they kind of imply that he already has super hearing. Like Martha's talking to him, he's got headphones on. He's like, "Oh yeah, I heard all that." Like that's one of those powers they just kind of thought I don't know. They kind of infer that he already has. And I think, much like you were saying earlier, they're like, well, we're kind of running out of powers. What else has he got? Oh, super hearing, I guess. Like this one, because I love almost every other of these new power episodes. This one's the weakest to me, just overall. So anyway, that's where I land on it.
Yeah, I know. I would have to agree. Right. Like he's blinded in that kryptonite heat vision blast accident. And then it's like, okay, so his super hearing is kicking in to compensate, which I guess is fine. I mean,
don't make him blind the whole episode and don't just wedge in the glasses for 4 scenes or something for no reason, right?
It's probably all they could get Tom Welling to wear them for, as you know.
As I know, as I asked him myself, he's not a fan of the glasses.
It's funny because I always, looking back on Smallville, I always think and talk about the powers in terms of, tied in with puberty and all that. And I'm always thinking of heat in that sense, right? Like that sexual excitement and the heat vision, like they're tied together. But that's really the only one.
Yeah.
I mean, with X-Ray...
X-Ray had nothing to do with it.
Like, he's thrown through the window, and then that seemed like, I don't know if the force of that or he's jarred. I mean, I don't know. And then here, so it's... And then when we get to Sneeze in season 6, it's that,
because he's sick.
He's picked up a cold in the Phantom Zone, and he's, pushing himself here on Earth with the cleanup efforts, and he gets a cold, yeah.
Well, that's an interesting point, because like the X-Ray vision is kind of the only one that doesn't have a trigger. The rest of these have like, there's a correlation. So... it was early. They didn't know.
I think it was when he got pushed through the window. I think it was I don't know.
Trauma. Well, Tina Greer had super strength.
Yeah.
So maybe so.
I think it was that. I'll go with that, I guess. Yeah, the super hearing was fine. I mean, you get that moment at the end where, there's another loft scene with Lana and she goes off and he hears her sobbing in her car as she drives away. Classic Smallville.
That is probably the worst needle drop. It felt so out of place. Kid Rock, cold and empty. I'm like, this doesn't, I feel like I'm at the rodeo. This doesn't feel like a Smallville, and because the show was so on point with the needle drops, to me, that was one of the maybe 2 or 3 times ever. I was like, what is this song they're playing? Like, it just didn't fit for whatever reason. That always stuck out to me. Another reason I don't like Whisper. So just get out of here, Whisper.
Now, we talked about the Forsaken episode where Pete departs Smallville. Covenant.
See you around, Clark. Emotional moment.
I know. Well, it is an emotional moment, but I feel like the news of it's played as kind of awkward, where he's like clearly saying goodbye to Clark, and he's like, "What? Why? It sounds like you're saying goodbye." Oh yeah, moving. I wish they had more time for Pete's farewell. That's all.
Same.
Covenant, best season finale of the show.
Maybe Salvation for me.
Oh, I know you do love your season 9.
I also really love Tempest because I really love season 1. Covenant, it's up. At the time, I don't think I love Covenant the way I've appreciated it more and more as time has gone on, because I mean, even Exodus, there was all this massive stuff happening, and Covenant is like, relatively low level. It's just, the fake Supergirl running around, but the most amazing in sequence of it. Talk about a needle drop. Mozart's Requiem, A+, and it's so classy too.
I know. As Lionel is getting his head shaved in prison.
Do it.
You see Chloe and her dad going into the safe house after she's testified against them. Boom, it goes up. Lex pouring himself a drink, poison, goes down, crashes into the table. And Clark pulled into the cave wall as Jonathan is left unconscious on the cave floor after Jor-El was strangling him.
And as we find out, as the Kryptonian symbol for Crusade appears on the Kent farm, because as we established, Jor-El knows exactly where the Kent farm is because of Relic.
Yeah. So, and now, my son, you shall be reborn. And that's as we see naked Clark in the fetal position in this little portal in the cave wall. Yeah.
That's another dimension, I guess. I mean, that's wherever Clark goes and Jonathan goes when they talk to Jor-El. That's what that is, I guess. Sure. Fine.
Yeah.
I don't mind.
Yeah, that's true. I know we do see.
That's the only explanation, Anthony.
It is that. I know. It's funny for all the thought about the show. It's like, yeah, when Jonathan talks to Jor-El at the beginning of season 3, he's in that dimension. Then when Clark is being reborn, jumping way ahead, but like in the Apocalypse episode in season 7, when Jor-El reaches out to Clark through the octagonal disc, he's in that realm again. And then in the series finale, right before Flight kicks in for Clark, when he gets thrown back by Darkseid, and then Jor-El shows him all of the trials that he's completed, all of his saves across the series. It's like he's not physically in the fortress. He's like in this other realm. Yeah.
It's whatever the disc can do that, you know?
Yeah.
Like when he gets in Apocalypse, where he disappears in front of Chloe. He's in the space between space, to quote Indiana Jones. That's where he went.
I know. But no, it's a tremendous ending. And, season 4, wonderful premiere. I thought it got off to such a great start as we have this reprogrammed Kal-El arrive. And, this kicks off this season-long quest that all of the characters are mixed up into to some degree or another. There are these ancient relics scattered across the world that contain these properties. And Lex uncovers one in Egypt, right, in the season premiere. And once it's unearthed, it sends out this beacon, and that alerts Kal-El. He takes flight. I mean, we get flight on the show. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And he steals that stone and others.
That's the best flying ever looked on the show, by the way.
Yes.
They never topped that.
I know. And then we have, look, season 4 overall, big picture, it's this notion that the Kryptonians had placed these 3 stones across Earth and when united, as we find out later, it will form, this master crystal that will give rise to the Fortress of Solitude. But if a human unites it, it'll be bad.
Sure.
And apparently if any of the stones,
human blood is such one of the elements. Yes.
Yeah. If human blood stains any of the elements, as happens in the season finale, it will bring forth another meteor shower and awaken this Kryptonian craft that we'll later find out is the Brainiac ship. I don't know. I mean, you've far more recently relived all of season 4. I mean, I don't know if there's anything to this.
Doesn't track at all, but it's fine because we moved past it in season 5. It's pretty good. But I mean, it doesn't matter on the big picture of things, but small scale, Clark playing football, I feel like that had been handled perfectly in season 1. He tried it, not for me, moving on. Then they give him this football plot, which I'm still critical of. I'm less critical of it than I was before. Over the course of the podcast, I was very hard on season 4, and everybody loves season 4 and kind of softened me on it. But still, like, we gotta find something for Clark to do. I guess I'm play football. What? No, like that's not this version of the character. I understand in the comics a lot, but remember this version was based off Superman the movie, where he's like the outcast guy who's picked on by the football team. Like to have him be on the football team, and they didn't really do that much interesting stuff with it. Frankly, like there should have been an episode where he'd be like, "Hey guys, we're not doing the Scarecrow thing anymore." For example. Anyway. I'm just saying that, like, if you're going to have him do this football thing, you could have done more with it. And it's just this thing that occupies time in season 4. And it doesn't, like, he already learned that lesson years ago. But maybe as kids, we got to learn the same lesson more than once. Maybe there's something to be said for that. So I don't want to completely flush it. But I think that took up a lot of real estate where, like, well, that's what Clark's doing this season, playing football.
I hear you. I don't know. I go back and forth on this. I don't disagree. I think, like the first season did kind of answer that. But I don't know. It's funny. I think this is where the show, consciously or not, maybe was trying to reconcile some of the character's history, right? Because pre-Crisis, it's very much he's on the sidelines. He's not participating like we see in the first season or first 3 seasons. But post-Crisis, right? The post-Crisis version of Superman, he's the star athlete. Early on in the pages of Byrne's Man of Steel, man, he's the star football player. So I kind of looked at it as maybe trying to reconcile that a little bit. I guess looking at it in the context of the larger show, I don't mind it so much because the show does get quite dark as we're moving forward, especially in the next season with the death of Jonathan. And so the idea that he gets like this glory run briefly playing football. And I think, again, we're talking about like the journey of the character. I mean, in season 4, I feel like, yes, you have the backdrop of the stones, but for the most part, it's Clark playing football.
He meets Bart Allen.
Yeah, he
meets the Flash.
Absolutely.
Impulse, whatever.
Yeah.
He meets the Flash.
But like, we have that. We have football. We have the prom. We have graduation. It's, kind of.
Shelby.
Yeah, Shelby.
That's a mainstay. That is a big moment. Him getting the dog. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, overall, like lighter moments. And I guess I saw football in keeping with that. So
that's a good point. The prom, a dog, football. These are the things of his journey in season 4. Fair enough. It was he made up for it with the season finale though. Heavy stuff with the second meteor shower. So big moment for him.
No, absolutely. So again, I like those aspects. It's funny. I think at the time I wasn't the biggest fan of season 4, But now looking back at it, I kind of appreciate the lightness, the relative lightness, because season 3 was definitely a darker year. And again, heading into the death of Jonathan, very heavy. So the fact that the show and Clark like got a little bit of that lightness, I'm okay with. And with the Stones, the only other thing I'll say, in fairness, and I will admit though, I rewatched very few episodes from season 4, but I appreciated the intention behind it, like trying to give this quest to all of the characters, right? And Lex is after the Stones, and of course, this is infamously the season where Lana is possessed by a witch, so you have all of that going on. But I feel like it was an attempt to at least make Lana part of the action and less of a bystander. So I don't think the execution worked, but I do think that the intention was ultimately good. And in fairness, I do recognize that I know they wanted to do more with Margot Kidder as Bridget Crosby, and they had to pivot to Jane Seymour as Genevieve Teague, and they had Jensen Ackles as Jason Teague, but then he went off to do the Supernatural pilot, so like he was MIA for a bit, and that character just like made a real fast turn.
Yeah.
So I think there was a lot like they were contending with there, and their plans kind of shifted, but the Stones thing kind of goofy.
You gotta be you gotta take it a little easier on season 4 because of all the things outside of the control. Even season 7, frankly, a lot of things outside their control happen then. So some storylines get dropped. That's definitely one of them. And as we talked about earlier, their attempt to clean it up, I at least give them the salute and we move on from. But no, if you sit down and try to make it make sense, it won't.
Yeah. And I mean, Jor-El, very minimal Jor-El in season 4. I mean, he talks to him in Sacred, and which was pivotal in the Stones arc, and then Commencement. And I feel like most of their conversations in that season was really more about the Stones. Like,
you must reunite the elements.
Yeah, it's like, all right,
sure.
So I don't know.
I love that. I love that with Clark. I think it's the finale. He's like, I don't know where they are. I don't know where to find them. Like he's like so like freaking out. It's just, I don't know. It's an amazing performance with Tom Welling, intentional or not. I find it hilarious when he's just yelling into the voice. I don't know where they are.
We never get an answer. This bothers me. Why the hell the Stones would be guarded by kryptonite?
Nope.
Right? First of all, the idea that kryptonite exists before the planet explodes and irradiates its fragments makes no sense.
Don't like that.
But also, and it's funny because like in Sacred, Martha says like, why would, if they're meant for a Kryptonian, if they're meant for you, like why would they be guarded with kryptonite?
Fair question.
Never an answer though. It's like,
I'm sure they planned to answer it at some point, but then, of course they were centuries before. Like there's no way Jor-El had them on Krypton in the 80s, but he sent through time portal. I don't know. Brainiac went back in time. Maybe they have time travel device. I don't know. You can't make sense of it.
No, I don't know. But it does lead. I mean, when he finally gets a hold of all of them, right? He had retrieved the first one. Then, Lana gives him another one, and because she knows it's meant for him. Right?
Yeah. And then he takes the one off the shelf in the Luthor Corp vault.
Right? Well, no, it's the one. Isn't it the one that's in Lionel's pocket, and then it goes off?
Oh, so then I guess Clark grabs it off Lionel's body.
Yeah, I think so, if I remember correctly, something like that.
That's right. He opens the safe, all that stuff. Right? Okay. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Look. We shouldn't wait too much time talking about these stones. They don't make sense. Don't even try.
I know. But a great moment in the finale when he does finally unite them and he throws the crystal, and then we pick up there in season 5 with the formation of the fortress. I mean, like that massive landmark moment in the history of the character and the show, the Fortress of Solitude.
That could have been the last scene of the show in a different version of the show. Him just even throwing the crystal could have been, and especially it forming, him talking to Jor-El. I mean, massive stuff. Gets a lot of information from Jor-El about Krypton and learns a lot, and gets interrupted, of course, because the show has to keep going. So we can't have him come out as Christopher Reeve 12 years later like the movies did. So he's got to get sucked out of that. Him being mortal for a few episodes, huge stuff, I think. Some life lessons there. We talked about that great Jor-El Lionel scene. Fantastic. He meets Aquaman. That's big. You guys are going to do your own episode on that about the Justice Leaguers. Huge. And then really, I mean, there's some Brainiac stuff in here. Like Martha almost dies. So it's kind of like is Jonathan going to die thing? Is it Martha this time? So that's a big moment. But really, you fast forward to the 100th episode. I mean, that's the big one here for him, right?
Yeah, I had forgotten how much the looming death was a part of the first half of that season, right? Because like again, this notion that a life has to be exchanged for him to be back. Now, again, probably overthinking this here a little bit. I'm on board with the idea that, Clark's been resurrected, right? When he's mortal, he's shot and hit and he dies. And that's when Lionel is activated and brings him to the fortress. He's resurrected. And that there must be balance in the universe. So a life must be exchanged. The notion that it has to be someone close to him, where does that come? Like, is Jor-El, I guess my question is Jor-El enforcing that? Or is he just like, I just know? Like, what's your take on that?
This is where the whole like God Jor-El AI comes into play, where it's like, all right, I'll send you through time, or I'll resurrect this person, or this, or there's only one this or that, or here's a blade. It's like, how do you know all these things? How do you, I don't know. He just knows how destiny works, I guess. But yeah, it's like, that's a really specific condition, of like, oh, well, someone that you love is going to die. Like, who knows that information? I don't know, but the universe does.
Yeah.
So,
well, and as far as, Clark making mistakes, I mean, the reason he's in this predicament in the first place is he doesn't, he forms the fortress, right? Like you said, he gets interrupted right as his training is about to begin. Jor-El is like, one journey has ended, another journey is about to begin. You see all the symbols like flashing in front of him. It's, again, very Superman the movie-esque, where it's like he's learning now, right, about Krypton. But he has to leave to save Chloe, and he promises to return, but Jor-El warns him, right? If you don't return, there will be dire consequences. And he chooses, instead of returning to the fortress to complete his training, he chooses to save Lana instead as the sun goes down and he becomes human. And, it was interesting because like at the start of Arrival, when he's in the fortress, he does acknowledge to Jor-El, he's like, I know I have a lot I can learn from you. So a little bit of now the thawing.
See that? Yeah, they're not as antagonistic to each other as they were before. Yeah.
Yeah. And your point about, maybe trying to line up with, the then new Superman movie that was, going to be coming, Superman Returns.
100% think that was the case. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we lead to reckoning and Lana dies. And of course, Clark being a young, impressionable, in love. How old is he? Is he 19? So he's still a teenager. He's going to make this impulsive decision to resurrect his girlfriend, not thinking about the consequences. And unfortunately leads to his father's death. And this is the biggest character thing of the whole series for him, really. And he doesn't get resolved until season 10. Again, the show coming back around, addressing the fact that he has been living in the shadow of this for 5 years and the guilt.
Yeah. The fact that episode 200, right, a significant portion
100 episodes later,
revolves around Brainiac 5, showing him his father's funeral, showing him the moment that Jonathan suffers this heart attack as he's fighting Lionel, who knows Clark's secret. I mean, I would say, probably the most seminal moment in the show's history. And as for the Jor-El piece, when Clark, in his anguish after Lana's died, because he revealed his secret, he proposed, she accepted. Lex realized that she knew Clark's secret, and he chased after her on the road, and Clark didn't get there in time, and she died. And he goes to the fortress, and Jor-El says, "There's one trial you have yet to experience, and there's only one do-over crystal." And like you said, impulsively, he just grabs it. It's one of those things, and we've seen this, and we'll see this from Clark in other instances where it's like he feels he doesn't have a choice, right? You go to the season 8 episode Infamous, where he reveals his identity to the world as the red blue blur, and everything falls apart.
We got to redo it.
And he needs to redo it. And Chloe's like, "Hey, you remember what happened the last time?" And he's like, "Well, I can't help people like this, so there's no choice."
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's again one of those things. Had the show, if they knew they had 10 years, I doubt we would have gotten this as early as we did. But I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, it's the loss of his father. I mean, just the central figure in his life. And I've talked about, again, how impactful those Jonathan scenes have been throughout the series and will be again when he makes his return appearances in season 10. But, one of the things, credit to John Schneider as a performer, because, and I know they've talked about this, the physical affection that he shows, the hands on the shoulder, kissing his head, and even, again, through the script, the expressions of love and pride, right? Like in Commencement, they have that moment, the Kents, where, the Kents are going to try to leave Smallville, and Martha wants Clark to come. And, Jonathan realizes, like, no, like, Clark has to do this. And he's like, you do this. You make us proud, son. Like, the man who's standing before me now. I know you can do it.
All the years watching you run around on this farm. I'm like, that's a series finale-esque line right there. Some great stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. But I love the depiction of Jonathan in terms of the writing and the performance, again, articulating those things that I think a kid should hear, but also, again, like the hugs, the hands on the shoulder. It's Again, a loving father towards his son. So yeah, I mean, absolutely heartbreaking when Jonathan goes. Not only is that a powerful note to end Reckoning, but it's also where we're going to say to be continued. Make sure you come back next week as Zach and I continue our conversation and chart the rest of Clark's journey over the remainder of the series, with a particular focus on his fraught relationship with Jor-El. In the meantime, be sure to check out Zach on Always Hold On to Smallville and the rest of the shows within the Always Hold On to podcast family. Thank you all for tuning in. Come back next week, and until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.